Billionaire Damien Hale finds his maid's daughter eating from his trash at 2 in the morning. And what happens next? Well, it's not what you'd expect. In a mansion where everything is perfect, one little girl's hunger becomes the most honest thing in the house. 10-year-old Zoe Santos is hiding in the shadows of a kitchen worth more than most people's homes, eating garbage because sometimes love means doing whatever it takes. When the man who has everything finally sees the girl who has nothing, something breaks open between them, something that's been locked away for years. Behind all that wealth and success is a truth neither of them is ready for. They're both starving, just in different ways. This isn't just a story about finding a kid eating leftovers. It's about how one child's desperate act of love and one moment of raw humanity fed the soul of a man who has been starving for purpose and reminded him of what it means to actually be alive. Before we get into the story, tell us, where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, we'd love to know. And if this story reminds you that kindness costs nothing but means everything, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks so much for spending your time with us. Enjoy the story. A 10-year-old girl knew that hunger was the loudest silence in a sleeping house. Zoe Santos held her breath, pressing her thin body flat against the cold industrial steel of the trash bins. Just a few more seconds, she prayed, her lips moving without sound. Just let the chef's assistant finish his rounds and leave. The kitchen in Mr. Hale's penthouse was bigger than any place Zoe had ever lived. It was a cathedral of excess, stainless steel appliances that cost more than cars, countertops of imported Italian marble that felt like ice even in summer, and copper pots that gleamed like stolen treasure under the motion sensor lights. Zoe was small for her age, her dark skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, her hair pulled back in tight braids that her mother redid every Sunday. She knew every shadow in this room. She had memorized them over the past 3 weeks, mapping out her survival. Her mother, Elena, was a maid here. She was the one who made the marble floors shine like mirrors, who folded the Egyptian cotton sheets in the guest suites that no one ever slept in. Tonight, her mother was on the East Wing's upper floor, cleaning bathrooms that were bigger than their entire studio apartment. She would be exhausted. Her back would be aching. The worry lines around her eyes, the ones that had appeared after Marcus got sick, would be deeper. Zoe's stomach twisted with a familiar hollow ache. It was 2:07 a.m. The service door clicked shut. Footsteps faded down the hallway. Silence. Zoe counted to 60 in her head, a habit born from weeks of practice. Then she slipped from her hiding place. Her worn sneakers made no sound on the polished stone floor. She moved like a ghost past the 8-burner commercial stove and the butcher block island where the private chef prepared meals that cost more than her mother earned in a week. Her target was the trash area near the service entrance. The discard station. Mr. Hale's chef was efficient. All food waste from the billionaire's solitary dinners or the staff's sparse lunches was supposed to be immediately disposed of. But the chef's assistant, a young man named Miguel who sometimes smiled at Zoe when her mother brought her to work, had a habit. He would set aside the food containers for a few minutes before taking them to the disposal room in the basement. Just in case Mr. Hale wanted something later. He never did. Zoe knew this. She also knew that Miguel did his final round at 2:15 a.m. She had exactly 8 minutes. Her hands trembled as she approached the stainless steel counter. There, she saw it. Her heart leaped. A half-eaten croissant, still in its wax paper. Beside it, a plastic container with strawberries and what looked like expensive cheese. Next to that, the crusts from what must have been a gourmet sandwich, the bread still soft. Tears stung her eyes. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief so profound it hurt. She thought of Marcus, lying in his hospital bed at St. Catherine's. Marcus with his bright smile and Captain America bandana covering his bald head. Marcus who never complained even when the chemo made him throw up 6 times in one night. Marcus who drew pictures of superheroes for the other kids in the oncology ward to make them feel braver. If she could eat this food, this garbage that was worth more than any meal she'd had in weeks, then her mother could have the oatmeal tomorrow. The half cup of oatmeal that was supposed to stretch between them for breakfast. Mama could eat it all. Mama needed strength. Mama was disappearing, getting thinner and grayer every day, working herself into dust to pay for Marcus's treatments. Zoe reached for the croissant, her fingers closing around the flaky pastry. It was still slightly warm. She lifted it to her mouth, already imagining the taste, already planning how she'd wrap the sandwich crusts in a napkin and hide them in her backpack for tomorrow. Motion sensor lights blazed to life. The sudden brightness was like a spotlight, like being caught on a stage in front of an audience of thousands. Zoe froze, the croissant inches from her lips, her heart stopping mid-beat. A shadow fell across her small frame, long and dark against the white tile floor. No. No, no, no. Not now. Not when she was so close. She looked up, her entire body trembling, and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was tall, so tall he seemed to fill the entire doorframe. He wasn't wearing one of the sharp suits she'd seen in photographs around the penthouse, the kind of suits that cost more than her mother made in 6 months. Instead, he wore a dark gray robe over what looked like a t-shirt and pajama pants, making him look almost normal. Almost human. But there was nothing normal about his presence. His brown hair was slightly disheveled, pushed back from his forehead like he'd been running his hands through it. His face was angular, with the kind of sharp cheekbones and strong jaw that belonged on magazine covers. And his eyes, even tired and confused in the harsh kitchen light, held a piercing intelligence that made Zoe feel transparent, like he could see straight through her skin to every secret she carried. The croissant fell from Zoe's numb fingers. It hit the pristine floor with a soft sound that seemed to echo like thunder in the massive kitchen. A few flakes of pastry scattered across the white tile like golden confetti. It was Damien Hale. The man who owned this building and 20 others like it. The man whose face appeared on the business news channels that played in the hospital waiting room. The man her mother had described in hushed, reverent tones. Mr. Hale is very important, Mija. Very busy. We must never disturb him. Never ask him for anything. We are lucky to work here. Do you understand? Zoe understood. She understood that this man decided with a signature whether families like hers survived or disappeared. She understood that her mother could be fired for this, for bringing her daughter to work, for letting that daughter steal from the trash, for the disgrace of poverty invading his perfect world. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest like in one of Marcus's comic books. She couldn't breathe. The air had turned thick, suffocating. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel, and at the end of that tunnel was the man who held her entire world in his hands. She was caught. Damien Hale stared at the child, his mind struggling to process the impossible scene unfolding in his kitchen. A child. A little girl. In his penthouse. At 2 a.m. Eating from the trash. The sequence of observations came slowly, his exhausted brain working through each detail like a computer processing corrupted data. Black girl. Maybe 10 years old. Thin, too thin. Worn clothes with a hole in the shoulder of her jacket. Braids that looked carefully done despite everything else suggesting poverty. Dark eyes wide with pure, primal terror. And in her hand, before she dropped it, had been a croissant. His croissant. Or rather, the one his chef had prepared yesterday and that he'd barely touched before abandoning it for another late-night work session. A croissant. From the trash. He'd lived in this penthouse for 8 years. It was less a home and more a monument to achievement, a gleaming, temperature-controlled showcase of what $8.3 billion could buy. Every surface was imported, every fixture custom-made, every room designed by award-winning architects to maximize the view of the city sprawling below. It was a statement property, featured in Architectural Digest and Forbes' Most Expensive Homes list. It was also the loneliest place Damien had ever known. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, heavy, like living inside a beautiful tomb. Since Catherine had left 2 years ago, taking her warmth and her pointed observations about his soul with her, the penthouse had become even more hollow. A gleaming shell occupied by a man who'd forgotten why he'd wanted it in the first place. He suffered from insomnia, had for years, but it had gotten worse after the divorce. Sleep was a battle he waged nightly and lost more often than not. Tonight, after another 17-hour day of board meetings and merger negotiations and calls with investors in Tokyo and London, his mind had refused to quiet. The walls of his bedroom had felt like they were closing in, and the silence had grown teeth. So he'd done something he rarely did anymore, decided to make his own food. Just a glass of water, maybe raid the fruit bowl. Something simple, something that didn't require calling the chef or assistant or any of the 8 staff members who kept his life running like a well-oiled machine. He'd walked through his penthouse, barefoot, his footsteps silent on the imported hardwood floors. Past the home gym with its $200,000 worth of equipment he hadn't used in 6 months. Past the library with its first editions and leather-bound classics he'd bought by the collection but never read. Past the formal dining room where a table for 12 sat empty every single night, each place setting arranged with mathematical precision by staff whose names he'd learned only recently. Elena. The head of housekeeping was named Elena. She'd worked for him for 3 years, and he'd only learned her name 4 months ago when he'd actually read the employee roster his assistant had prepared. Before that, she'd just been the maid, efficient, invisible, unremarkable except for the fact that his floors had never been cleaner. He'd pushed open the kitchen door, expecting darkness and the faint hum of his sub-zero refrigerator. Instead, he'd found her. This child. This impossible, terrified child who was now frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights, her small body pressed against the industrial trash bins as if she could somehow melt into the steel and disappear. Her chest was heaving with panicked breaths, and her eyes, those dark, expressive eyes, held a fear so profound it made something twist uncomfortably in Damien's chest. Who? He started, his voice coming out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat, trying to soften his tone and failing. Who are you? The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him with those huge, terrified eyes. Damien took a step forward, and the child flinched so violently she knocked into the trash bin behind her. The metal gave a hollow clang that echoed through the kitchen. I'm not going to hurt you, he said, and even as the words left his mouth, he realized how ridiculous they sounded. He was a 6'2" billionaire who'd just caught a child stealing food from his garbage in the middle of the night. Of course she thought he was going to hurt her. Or call the police. Or whatever terrifying scenario was playing out in her young mind. I'm sorry. The words finally came from her, barely a whisper, choked with tears. I'm so sorry, sir. Please. Please don't tell my mama. Please. That voice, small and desperate and trying so hard to be brave, did something to Damien. Cracked something open that he'd sealed shut years ago when he'd learned that feelings were liabilities in the business world, that empathy was weakness, that success required a certain ruthlessness. Your mama, he repeated, his mind making connections. A child in his penthouse. A child who called someone mama with that particular inflection. Your mother works here. The girl nodded, a jerky, terrified movement. A tear rolled down her cheek, and she wiped at it angrily with the back of her hand, as if crying was a betrayal. Realization dawned slowly. Elena, he said. Elena Santos. You're her daughter. Another nod. Damien stared at her, his mind reeling. Elena had a daughter. Elena had a child, and that child was thin enough that he could see the delicate bones of her wrists, and that child was in his kitchen at 2 a.m. eating food from the garbage. What's your name? He asked, his voice gentler now. Zoe. It came out as barely a breath. Zoe Santos, sir. Zoe. He repeated it, and something about saying her name out loud made her more real, more human, more than just an abstract problem to be solved. Where is your mother right now? Working. Zoe's voice cracked. She's upstairs. In the east wing. Cleaning the guest bathrooms. She told me to stay in the staff room. She told me to do my homework and be quiet and not touch anything. The words tumbled out faster now, desperate, pleading. She didn't know I was here. She doesn't know. This isn't her fault. Please, Mr. Hale, please don't fire her. She needs this job. We need this job. The staff room. Damien had a vague memory of a small, windowless space in the basement level with a table and some chairs. He'd never actually been in it, but he'd signed off on the renovations when he'd bought the building. That's where Elena had told her daughter to wait while she cleaned his home at 2 a.m. While her daughter sat in a basement room doing homework. Or, apparently, while her daughter snuck up to the kitchen to eat garbage. Zoe, he said carefully, why were you eating from the trash? The question hung in the air between them. It was the most obvious question, the most important question, and yet part of Damien didn't want to hear the answer. Because he already knew. He'd seen the answer in her too thin frame, in her worn clothes, in the desperate way she'd been holding that croissant. Zoe's voice broke. She looked down at the fallen pastry on the floor, at the scattered flakes that had cost his chef probably 50 cents to make but represented something entirely different to her. I was hungry. 2 words. Simple. Devastating. Hungry, Damien repeated, and the word felt foreign in his mouth. When had he last been truly hungry? Not the mild discomfort of skipping lunch during a long meeting, but real hunger. The kind that made a child sneak through a darkened penthouse to eat garbage. He couldn't remember. Probably never. When did you last eat? He asked. Zoe's fingers twisted in the hem of her jacket. I had. Mama gave me half of her lunch. Yesterday. At the hospital. The hospital? A new piece of information, each word raising more questions. Why were you at the hospital? Fresh tears spilled down Zoe's cheeks. My brother. Marcus. He's sick. And there it was. The story revealing itself in fragments, each piece more heartbreaking than the last. A sick brother. A mother working late-night hours. A child eating from the trash because she was hungry. Damien Hale had negotiated billion-dollar mergers. He'd faced down hostile boards and aggressive investors. He'd built a tech empire from nothing but code and determination. He'd been called ruthless, brilliant, visionary, and cold in equal measure. But standing in his pristine kitchen at 2:15 in the morning, watching a 10-year-old girl cry over a dropped croissant, he realized he had absolutely no idea what to do. Zoe, he said finally, his voice carrying a tone of command he couldn't quite suppress even when trying to be gentle. Come with me. The girl's eyes went wide with fresh terror. Sir, I. Now, he said, then immediately regretted the sharpness. But it was too late. Zoe was already moving, her small body trembling as she stepped away from the trash bins, leaving the fallen croissant and the strawberries and all her desperate hopes on the floor behind her. She looked like she was walking to her execution. And Damien realized with a sick feeling in his stomach that she probably thought she was. When did I become the kind of man that children fear? He thought. When did I become someone who makes a hungry child look at me like I'm a monster? But he knew the answer. He'd become that man years ago, slowly, imperceptibly, one ruthless business decision at a time. He'd become his father, the workaholic who'd built an empire and died alone at his desk, mourned by no one who'd actually known him. Catherine's words from their last fight echoed in his mind, "You've become a machine, Damien. You see people as resources, as numbers on spreadsheets. You've forgotten how to feel. I don't even know if there's a real person left inside you anymore." He dismissed her as emotional. Irrational. Wrong. Now, looking at Zoe's terrified face, he wondered if Catherine had been the only person brave enough to tell him the truth. This way, he said, gesturing toward the main kitchen area, away from the trash bins and the service entrance. Away from the evidence of his incredible, shameful blindness. Zoe followed him on shaking legs, and with each step, Damien felt the foundations of his carefully constructed world beginning to crack. The walk from his bedroom to the kitchen had been a journey through his own carefully curated emptiness. Damien found himself replaying it now, seeing it differently through the lens of this child's presence, this small, hungry witness to his excess. It had started, as it always did, with the insomnia. He'd been lying in his king-sized bed, custom-made, with a mattress that cost $15,000 and sheets with a thread count higher than most people's monthly rent. The bedroom was climate-controlled to exactly 68 degrees, the blackout curtains blocking every photon of the city's light pollution. It should have been perfect for sleep. It was scientifically optimized for sleep. But Damien hadn't slept properly in 2 years. Not since the divorce. He'd stared at the ceiling, his mind churning through the day's problems. The board was pushing for another round of layoffs, 500 people, just numbers on a spreadsheet, just trimming the fat to boost quarterly earnings. The merger with Technova was stalling because their CEO wanted better terms. The new AI division was hemorrhaging money. On and on, an endless loop of problems that required solutions, decisions that affected thousands of lives but felt abstract, distant, manageable. At 1:47 a.m., he'd given up on sleep. Again. He'd risen from the bed, his bare feet sinking into carpet so plush it felt like walking on clouds. He'd pulled on his robe, Italian cashmere, a gift from Catherine before she'd left, back when she'd still thought expensive things might fill the void where his heart used to be. The bedroom door had opened silently on hinges that cost more than most cars. Everything in his penthouse was engineered to be perfect, frictionless, silent. Like living inside a luxury hotel where you were the only guest. He'd walked down the hallway, past the home gym. The gym took up 800 square feet, roughly the size of a comfortable apartment. It had state-of-the-art equipment, a Peloton bike still in its protective plastic, a rowing machine he'd used twice, a complete set of weights ranging from 5 to 80 pounds, a yoga studio with heated floors and floor-to-ceiling mirrors. His personal trainer came 3 times a week to a gym Damien hadn't entered in 6 months. He still paid her, of course. It was easier than canceling. Past the gym, he'd passed the library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves made from reclaimed wood, filled with first editions and leather-bound classics. Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Morrison, Marquez, all the authors an educated billionaire was supposed to have read. He'd bought them by the collection, curated by a firm that specialized in creating libraries for people who didn't actually read. The books sat there, perfect and untouched, props in the stage set of his life. When had he last read for pleasure? He couldn't remember. Reading now meant market reports, earnings statements, contract language. Words as weapons and tools, never as art. Then the formal dining room. This was perhaps the saddest room in the penthouse. A table for 12, made from a single slab of walnut that had been imported from Italy. Each place setting was arranged with mathematical precision every single day by Elena, or was it one of the other housekeepers? He wasn't sure. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier above, itself a $40,000 work of art he'd bought at auction because his decorator said it would make a statement. The statement it made was this: 12 people should gather here. Laughter should echo off these walls. Wine should be poured, food shared, conversations had. Instead, the tables sat empty every night. Damien ate most of his meals at his desk or standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone. When was the last time he'd sat at that table? He genuinely couldn't remember. Maybe never. The penthouse was 8,000 square feet of perfection, and Damien lived in maybe 300 of them. His bedroom, his office, occasionally the kitchen. The rest was just space. Beautiful, expensive, empty space. He employed 8 staff members to maintain this emptiness. A chef who prepared meals for one. An assistant chef who helped create food that often went uneaten. 3 housekeepers who cleaned rooms no one entered. A driver who kept 3 cars pristine for trips Damien rarely took. A personal assistant who managed a social calendar that was 90% business. And a head of security who monitored a penthouse that posed no actual threat beyond its suffocating isolation. He knew their functions. Chef, Andre. Creates food. Driver, James. Manages vehicles. Security, Robert. Keeps things safe. But their names? Their lives? Until tonight, until he'd found Elena's daughter eating from his garbage, he'd known almost nothing. They moved through his space like ghosts, present but invisible, necessary but not quite real. When did I stop seeing them as people? The question had no easy answer, because it hadn't been a single moment. It had been gradual, imperceptible, like a slow leak draining the humanity from his soul one drop at a time. He'd started Hale Tech at 23, fresh out of Stanford with a computer science degree and a head full of dreams. The original mission statement, which he'd written on a napkin in his first apartment, had been, technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. Noble. Naive. He'd believed it then. But somewhere between 23 and 45, between startup and empire, between having nothing and having $8.3 billion, that napkin had gotten lost. The mission had morphed into something else: growth, market share, shareholder value, quarterly earnings. People had become resources. Employees were human capital. Layoffs were strategic restructuring. The words had changed, becoming softer, more palatable, until he could eliminate 500 jobs without feeling the weight of 500 families affected. His father had taught him that. Jonathan Hale, who'd built a pharmaceutical company from nothing and died at his desk at 62, having never attended a single one of Damien's school plays, never made it to his graduation, never said, "I'm proud of you," without attaching conditions. His father, who'd been mourned by business associates but loved by no one. When did I become my father? Damien whispered to himself now, standing in his kitchen with a terrified child. Catherine had seen it happening. She'd warned him, tried to pull him back from the edge. He could still hear their final fight, 2 years ago, her voice breaking as she'd stood in this very kitchen with her suitcases by the door. "You've become a machine, Damien. You see people as resources, as numbers on spreadsheets. You've forgotten how to feel." He'd been annoyed by her dramatics. "That's not fair, Catherine. I provide for us. I've built something meaningful." Meaningful? She'd laughed, but there'd been no humor in it. "You've built a monument to your own ego. You work 18-hour days at a company that prints money while you've forgotten how to have a conversation that isn't about profit margins. When was the last time you asked me about my day? When was the last time you noticed I was in the room? I notice. You notice functions. You notice when dinner isn't ready or when your shirts aren't pressed. But you don't see me, Damien. You don't see anyone anymore. And I can't watch you disappear into this thing you've become." He'd called her emotional. Irrational. Said she was being unfair, that she didn't understand the pressure he was under, the responsibility he carried. She just looked at him with profound sadness. "I understand perfectly. That's why I'm leaving. Because you're already gone." Now, 2 years later, standing across from a 10-year-old girl who was trembling with fear and hunger, Catherine's words crashed over him with the force of truth he'd spent 2 years denying. She'd been right. He had become a machine. He had forgotten how to feel, how to see, how to be human. And it had taken a child eating from his trash to wake him up. Damien gestured to the kitchen island, the massive butcher block surface where his chef prepared meals that cost hundreds of dollars. "Sit," he said, his voice gentler now. "Please." Zoe perched on the edge of one of the high stools, looking like she might bolt at any second. Her small hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles pale against her dark skin. Damien pulled out the stool across from her and sat down, bringing himself closer to her eye level. He was still taller, still intimidating, but at least now he wasn't looming over her like some corporate tower. "Zoe," he said, keeping his voice soft. "I'm not going to hurt you. And I'm not going to fire your mother. Do you understand?" She nodded, but he could see she didn't believe him. Why would she? People like him made promises to people like her all the time, and then broke them when it became inconvenient. "Tell me about your mother," he said. "Elena. How long has she worked here?" 3 years. Zoe's voice was barely above a whisper. "She works really hard, sir. She never complains. She always does everything perfect." 3 years. Elena Santos had cleaned his home, organized his life, made everything run smoothly for 3 years, and until tonight, he'd thought of her as simply the maid. Not a person with a name, a history, a daughter, problems, dreams. "Where is she right now?" he asked, though he already knew. Zoe had told him. But he needed to hear it again, needed to understand the full picture of his blindness. "Working," Zoe said. "She's upstairs in the East Wing, cleaning the guest bathrooms. She told me to stay in the staff room downstairs and do my homework. She said to be quiet and not touch anything." Fresh tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale. I know I wasn't supposed to be up here. I know I broke the rules. But I was so hungry." The words hung between them, simple and devastating. "When did you last eat?" Damien asked. "Really eat? A full meal?" Zoe's fingers twisted together. We had dinner 3 days ago. Rice and beans that Mama made. Since then." She swallowed hard. "Mama gave me half her lunch yesterday at the hospital. An apple and some crackers from the vending machine. But I know she didn't eat anything else. I hear her stomach growling at night when she thinks I'm asleep." 3 days. The number hit Damien like a physical blow. His employee, his trusted, efficient, invisible employee, hadn't eaten in 3 days. Neither had her child. They were literally starving while he threw away more food than they saw in a week. He thought of this morning's breakfast, which he'd barely touched. Eggs Benedict with smoked salmon, fresh fruit, artisan toast. His chef had probably thrown it away. $50 worth of food, straight into the garbage. While Elena Santos and her daughter went hungry. Why the hospital, he asked, though part of him already knew. Already dreaded the answer. The tears that had been threatening spilled over. "My brother," Zoe whispered. "Marcus. He's sick." "What kind of sick?" She reached into the pocket of her worn jacket with trembling fingers. For a moment, Damien thought she might pull out something dangerous, a ridiculous thought. She was 10 years old and terrified, but instead, she withdrew a small photograph. The edges were soft from constant handling, the colors slightly faded. It had been touched so many times, held so often, that it was wearing away. She held it out to him, her hand shaking. Damien took it carefully, as if it were made of glass. A young boy stared back at him from the photograph. He couldn't have been more than 7, with the same bright, expressive eyes as his sister. He wore a colorful bandana on his head, Captain America, Damien realized, and he was smiling. Not a forced, photo day smile, but a genuine expression of joy that seemed to radiate from the image. But Damien could see what the smile was hiding. The boy was thin, his cheekbones too prominent. The bandana wasn't a fashion choice, it was covering hair loss. And there, barely visible at the edge of the photo, was an 4 stand. He turned the photograph over. Written on the back in careful, feminine handwriting, "Marcus, day 12 of chemo. Still fighting." The words blurred as Damien stared at them. Day 12 of chemo. Still fighting. "My brother," Zoe said, her voice breaking. "He's only 7 years old, and he has leukemia. Something cracked open in Damien's chest. Not a clean break, but a jagged, painful fracture in a place that had been sealed shut for so long he'd forgotten it existed. The place where feelings lived, where empathy resided, where the human part of him had been locked away like something dangerous that needed to be contained. He looked at the photograph again. At Marcus's smile, at the bandana covering his baldness, at the words on the back. Still fighting. He looked up at Zoe, who was watching him with those huge, terrified eyes, waiting for him to say something, do something, make a decision that would determine her family's fate. And Damien realized that this moment, this exact moment in his sterile, perfect kitchen at 2:30 in the morning, was a crossroads. He could be the man he'd become, the machine who saw this as a problem to be managed, an employee to be replaced, an inconvenience to be eliminated. He could maintain his efficient, emotionless, empty existence. Or he could be something else. Someone else. Someone who remembered that napkin from 22 years ago, technology should serve humanity. Someone who remembered that people weren't resources. They were people. Come with me, he said, his voice rough with emotions he hadn't felt in years. Zoe's eyes widened with fresh fear. Sir, please. I'm not going to hurt you, Zoe, he said, standing up. I'm going to feed you. He walked to the massive sub-zero refrigerator, this monument to excess, and pulled open the door. The light spilled out, illuminating shelves laden with food. Organic produce, artisan cheeses, imported meats, fresh pasta, exotic fruits he couldn't even name. Enough food to feed a family for weeks. And somewhere in this building, in a basement staff room, Elena Santos's daughter had been sitting alone, hungry, while all of this sat untouched. What do you want to eat? He asked, and found that his hands were shaking slightly as he stared at all this abundance that had meant nothing to him until this moment. Behind him, Zoe made a small, choked sound. Like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Like the question itself was impossible. Damien turned to look at her, this small, brave child who'd been eating from his trash to save her mother, whose brother was fighting cancer, who represented everything he'd stopped seeing in his climb to the top. Anything, he said firmly. Anything you want. Choose. And as Zoe stared at the open refrigerator with wonder and disbelief, Damien Hale made a decision that would change everything. He was done being a machine. It was time to remember what it meant to be human. Anything you want, Damien said, gesturing to the open refrigerator, its interior glowing like a treasure chest. Choose. Zoe stared at the shelves, her eyes moving over the abundance with something between wonder and disbelief. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Opened it again. I don't know, she whispered finally. There's so much. Of course there was. Damien looked at it now through her eyes, the overflow, the excess, the waste. Organic strawberries from California. Imported prosciutto wrapped in delicate paper. 3 types of cheese he couldn't name. Vegetables so perfect they looked artificial. This was just one refrigerator in one kitchen, and it held more food than Zoe had probably seen in months. Sit down, he said, his voice softer now. Let me make you something. Sir, you don't have to. Sit. Not harsh, but brooking no argument. Zoe moved slowly to the stool at the kitchen island, perching on its edge like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. Her small hands gripped the marble counter, and Damien noticed for the first time how thin her wrists were, how her jacket hung loose on her frame. He turned back to the refrigerator, scanning the shelves. When had he last made his own food? Not heated something up or assembled a plate, but actually prepared a meal. He couldn't remember. Years, probably. Maybe back when he and Catherine had first been married, before success and staff and the slow erosion of anything resembling a normal life. His hands moved with uncharacteristic purpose now, pulling out ingredients. Artisan bread from the bakery in Soho that his chef ordered twice weekly. Sliced turkey, organic, free-range, probably more expensive per pound than most people's hourly wage. Swiss cheese from some small farm in Vermont. Crisp romaine lettuce that was somehow still cold and perfect despite being days old. Heirloom tomatoes that cost $8 each. He laid everything on the marble counter, arranged like surgical instruments for an operation he wasn't entirely sure how to perform. Zoe watched him from her perch, her dark eyes tracking his every movement. Was she afraid? Confused? Both? He couldn't tell. He was used to reading boardrooms, not children. "Do you like turkey?" he asked, realizing too late that he should have asked before pulling everything out. She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I like everything. I like everything." The words carried a weight he understood now, not preference, but desperation. When you're hungry enough, you like everything. Damien found a plate, expensive porcelain, hand-painted, part of a set that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He laid 2 slices of bread on it and began building the sandwich. Turkey, layered thick. Cheese. Lettuce torn into careful pieces. Tomatoes sliced thin. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. This was absurd. He was a billionaire making a sandwich at 2:45 in the morning for a child he'd found eating from his trash. This wasn't his role. This wasn't what people like him did. He had staff for this. He had systems, processes, appropriate channels. But all those systems had failed spectacularly, hadn't they? All those processes had somehow resulted in his employee's daughter starving while he slept on $1,000 sheets. He found mayonnaise, European, in a glass jar, and mustard with seeds still visible. He spread them with precise care, then brought the sandwich together. He added a pickle from a jar in the refrigerator door, speared it with a fancy toothpick that probably cost $1 by itself. From the refrigerator, he poured a full glass of milk, whole milk, organic, from grass-fed cows, the kind of ridiculous detail he paid for without thinking. He set the plate and glass on the counter in front of Zoe. "Eat," he said. She stared at the sandwich like it might vanish if she touched it. Her small hands remained gripped on the counter edge, not reaching for the food. "Sir, I can't," she whispered. "This is yours. This is too much. Too much." A sandwich. The simplest meal he could imagine, and it was too much. "Zoe." He kept his voice gentle but firm. "Eat. That's an order." Still, she hesitated. The sandwich sat between them, absurdly large on the delicate plate, a bridge between 2 worlds that should never have collided. "Please," Damien added, and that single word, one he rarely used, seemed to break through her fear. She reached out slowly, her thin fingers wrapping around the sandwich. It looked enormous in her small hands. She lifted it to her mouth, her eyes flicking up to his face as if checking one last time for permission or trick or trap. Then she took a bite. From Zoe's perspective, the sandwich was a revelation. She'd had sandwiches before, of course. Sometimes Mama would buy the cheapest bread at the store and make sandwiches with whatever was on sale, processed cheese slices, bologna that came in plastic packages, iceberg lettuce that was more water than vegetable. Those sandwiches tasted like survival, like making do, like gratitude for anything at all. This was different. The bread was soft but substantial, with a crust that gave way under her teeth. The turkey was thick and flavorful, not the thin, salty slices she was used to. The cheese tasted rich, almost buttery. The lettuce was crisp, the tomato sweet. Everything about it was fresh and perfect and more generous than any meal she'd had in months. She took another bite, faster this time. Then another. Tears started streaming down her face, hot and shameful, but she couldn't stop them. She couldn't stop eating, either. The hunger that had been a constant companion for days, for weeks, really, suddenly roared to life with the promise of satisfaction. Her stomach, which had learned to be quiet, now screamed for more. She tried to maintain some dignity, to eat slowly like Mama had taught her, to remember her manners even in this impossible situation. But hunger didn't care about dignity. Hunger was primal and desperate and overwhelming. She ate the entire sandwich in less than 4 minutes, her small jaw working furiously. When it was gone, she reached for the milk, drinking it in long, desperate gulps that left a white mustache on her upper lip. Only when the glass was empty did she look up. Mr. Hale had turned away, standing by the window that overlooked the city. His back was to her, his hands braced on the counter, his head slightly bowed. Was he angry? Disgusted? She couldn't tell. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough. "Thank you, sir." Damien couldn't look at her. If he looked at her, he would see the tears, the desperate gratitude, the raw relief of a child who'd been fed when she was starving. And if he saw that, he would have to acknowledge what it meant, that he'd built a life so disconnected from humanity that a child could starve in his own home. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "Tell me about Marcus." Behind him, he heard Zoe shift on the stool. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." He turned to face her now, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "Start at the beginning." Zoe wiped at her face with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "He got sick 9 months ago. At first, Mama thought it was just the flu. Marcus was tired all the time, kept getting fevers. But then he started bruising really easy, and he was so pale. Mama took him to the clinic, and they did tests, and..." Her voice broke. Damien waited, giving her time. "They said it was acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The doctor called it. It's a kind of blood cancer." Damien's chest tightened. 7 years old. 7 years old and fighting cancer. "They started treatment right away," Zoe continued, her words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. "Chemo. It made him so sick. He lost all his hair, and he threw up all the time, and he was in so much pain. But he never complained. Not once. He'd just smile and tell Mama he was okay." "What kind of treatment is he receiving?" Damien asked, his mind already moving to practical questions, problems that could be solved. "Basic chemotherapy. The doctors say it's helping, but not fast enough. There's this new experimental drug, they call it a targeted therapy. It's supposed to be really good for kids with Marcus's type of leukemia. But..." She looked down at her empty plate. "Insurance doesn't cover experimental treatments. The drug costs $12,000 per dose, and Marcus would need at least 12 doses. Maybe more." The math was simple and devastating. $144,000 minimum. For a family that was eating from garbage cans, it might as well be $1 billion. "The hospital bills are already at $47,000, Zoe said quietly. "Mama's insurance pays for some of it, but not all. We get letters every week. Red letters. They say they'll stop Marcus's treatment if we don't pay." Damien thought of his last board meeting, where they'd spent 3 hours debating whether to pursue a merger that would increase his net worth by $200 million. 3 hours arguing over numbers that meant nothing, while Elena Santos's son faced death for want of $144,000. "Your mother," he said carefully. "Elena. She's been working double shifts." Zoe nodded. "Triple, sometimes. She works here during the day, then at night too when you're at the office. And on her days off, she cleans offices downtown. I barely see her anymore. And when I do, she looks so tired. So sad. She sold your car. 6 months ago. Got $3,200 for it. It went straight to the hospital. And your furniture? 4 months ago. We had nice stuff, from when Papa was alive. Mama cried when they took Papa's chair, the one he used to read to us in." Zoe's voice got smaller. "We got $1,100. It lasted about 3 weeks. Damien forced himself to ask the next question. "Your father? Heart attack?" Last year. He didn't have life insurance. We didn't have anything saved because we'd been paying off his student loans. She looked up at him, her eyes old beyond her years. Bad things just kept happening. One after another. Like we were cursed or something. Not cursed. Just poor. Just vulnerable. Just the kind of people who fell through the cracks of a system that people like Damien had built, a system where a 7-year-old's life depended on his mother's ability to work herself to death. You moved apartments, Damien said. 3 months ago. From a 2-bedroom to a studio in a worse neighborhood. It saves $600 a month. The windows don't close all the way, and there are rats sometimes, but... She shrugged, a gesture too adult for a 10-year-old. It's not important. Marcus is important. And the food? Zoe looked down at the crumbs on her plate. Mama's been skipping meals for a couple months now. She pretends she ate at work or that she's not hungry, but I know she's lying. I hear her stomach at night. She thinks I'm asleep, but I hear it. The picture was complete now, painted in brutal detail. A widow working 3 jobs to save her dying son. A daughter eating garbage to spare her mother a meal. A 7-year-old fighting cancer while his family sacrificed everything, food, furniture, shelter, dignity, and still came up short. And through it all, Elena Santos had come to work every day with a smile on her face, had cleaned his floors and organized his life and never once asked for help. Because people like her didn't ask people like him for help. The distance between them was too vast, the power imbalance too severe. How many others? Damien thought. How many of his 8 staff members had stories like this? How many were drowning silently while he lived in oblivious luxury? He thought of Andre, his chef. Did he know Andre's last name? Did Andre have children? Medical bills? Dreams being deferred or destroyed? He thought of James, his driver. Maria, one of the housekeepers. Robert, his security chief. He knew their functions, their schedules, their job performance ratings. But their lives? Their struggles? Their humanity? Nothing. He'd made himself deliberately blind to it. It was easier that way. Cleaner. More efficient. You couldn't be bothered by problems you didn't know existed. But now he knew. And he couldn't unknow it. Damien pulled his phone from the pocket of his robe. Zoe tensed immediately, her eyes going wide. Sir, please. Please don't call security. Please don't fire my mama. I'll leave right now. I'll never come back. Just please. I'm not calling security, Damien said, his finger already moving to his contacts. Then who? Someone who can help your brother. He found the name he wanted, Dr. Mark Rothstein. Personal physician, on retainer, available 24/7 for whatever Damien needed. He'd called Mark twice in 2 years, once for a flu shot before a trip to Asia, once for a physical required by his insurance company. Now he was going to ask for something that actually mattered. The phone rang once. Twice. Then a groggy voice answered. Damien? It's almost 3 in the morning. Is everything? Mark, Damien interrupted, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. I need you to wake up and listen very carefully. Across from him, Zoe stared with wide, disbelieving eyes, her hands clutched together as if in prayer. There's a 7-year-old boy named Marcus Santos, Damien continued. He's a patient at St. Catherine's Oncology Department. He has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Damien, I'm not an oncologist. I know. I need you to call St. Catherine's right now. Tonight. Whatever his medical bills are, past, present, future, I'm covering them. All of them. Silence on the other end of the line. And I want him transferred to your care, Damien continued. Not you personally, but you're going to connect me with the best pediatric oncologist in the city. The best in the country if necessary. Cost is not a factor. Do you understand? Yes. Dr. Rothstein's voice was fully alert now. Yes, I understand. You're saying. I'm saying that boy gets whatever treatment he needs. Experimental drugs, clinical trials, the best specialists. If it exists and it can help him, he gets it. Call the hospital. Call whoever you need to call. Make it happen. It could cost. I don't care what it costs, Damien said, and he realized he'd never meant anything more in his life. Just make sure Marcus Santos gets the treatment he needs to survive. Can you do that? Yes. Yes, of course. I'll start making calls immediately. Good. I want a full report by morning. Every detail. And Mark? Yes. Thank you. Damien ended the call and looked at Zoe. She was crying again, but differently this time. Not tears of hunger or fear or shame. These were tears of hope, pure and overwhelming, the kind that come when impossible things suddenly become possible. You're going to help Marcus? Her voice was barely audible. Yes, Damien said simply. But why? Why would you do this for us? It was a good question. The kind of question that required an honest answer. Damien looked at this child who'd been eating from his garbage, who'd been sacrificing herself for her dying brother, who represented everything he'd stopped seeing in his climb to the top. Because I just remembered what it means to be human, he said. And for the first time in years, it felt like the truth. The first call had been made. Dr. Rothstein would handle Marcus's medical crisis. But Damien wasn't finished. Zoe sat frozen on the kitchen stool, staring at him with eyes that held a fragile, terrified hope. Her small hands were clasped together so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Sir, she whispered. What are you doing? Damien didn't answer. He was already scrolling through his contacts, his thumb moving with purpose. He found the name he needed, David Chen. David was his personal attorney, the lawyer who'd handled his divorce, his estate planning, every major legal decision for the past decade. David was expensive, discreet, and ruthlessly efficient. He was also, Damien suddenly realized, someone he'd never asked a single personal question. Did David have children? A wife? Parents who needed care? He didn't know. The phone rang 3 times before a crisp, alert voice answered. Damien. It's 2:47 in the morning. This better be. I need new employment contracts drafted by morning, Damien interrupted. A pause. Then, what kind of contracts? Elena Santos. She's my head of housekeeping. I want her salary doubled, effective immediately. Doubled? David's voice carried the particular tone of a lawyer who thought his client might be having a breakdown. That's highly irregular. Has there been a performance issue that requires? No performance issue. Her performance is exceptional. That's why I'm doubling her salary. I see. David clearly didn't see. And when you say, immediately, you mean? I mean retroactive to today. This morning. Right now. Whatever makes it legal and binding. Damien could hear the sound of David getting out of bed, the rustle of movement, the click of a light switch. When David spoke again, his tone had shifted from sleepy confusion to professional focus. All right. Doubled salary. What else? Comprehensive family health insurance. No deductibles, no co-pays, no coverage limits. Full medical, dental, and vision for her and her dependents. That's going to be expensive. I don't care what it costs. Make sure experimental treatments are covered. Clinical trials. Anything that's not standard insurance. Experimental treatments. David was typing now, Damien could hear the keyboard clicking through the phone. That's going to require a custom policy. Most insurers won't. Then find one that will. Or self-insure if we have to. Just make it happen. Understood. Anything else? Damien looked at Zoe, at this small girl who'd been eating garbage while her brother fought cancer, who should have been thinking about homework and friends and normal 10-year-old concerns instead of her mother's empty stomach and red letters from hospitals. Set up a college fund for her 2 children, he said. Initial deposit of $200,000, structured for growth. Make sure it's protected, can only be used for educational purposes. The typing stopped. $200,000. For a housekeeper's children. Yes. Damien. David's voice carried careful concern. I need to ask, are you feeling all right? Has something happened? Because this is extremely unusual behavior, and I have a fiduciary responsibility to. Something has happened, Damien said, his eyes still on Zoe. I woke up. That's what happened. Silence on the line. David, how long have you worked for me? 10 years. In those 10 years, have I ever done anything without a reason? No. Then trust me now. I have a reason. Draft the contracts. Have everything on my desk by 8 a.m. It's going to take significant time to. You have a team. Use them. Bill me for the overtime. Bill me triple if you have to. Just get it done. Another pause. Then, all right. You'll have the contracts by 8. Thank you, David. Damien ended the call and immediately opened the house internal directory on his phone. The East Wing extension. He dialed. It rang 4 times before a young, uncertain voice answered. Hello. Mr. Hale. He recognized the voice, barely. Maria, one of the junior housekeepers. Or was it Sophia? He should know. He should have known for years. This is Mr. Hale, he confirmed. I need you to find Elena Santos immediately. Mrs. Santos. Is something wrong? Is there an emergency? The young woman's voice climbed with worry. No emergency. But I need her to come to the main kitchen right away. Can you find her? She's in the East Wing, sir. Cleaning the master guest suite. The master guest suite. A room no one had slept in for 2 years. Elena was scrubbing bathrooms at 3 a.m. for rooms that existed only to gather dust. Tell her to come to the kitchen, Damien repeated. Tell her it's important but she's not in trouble. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Right away. Damien hung up and looked at Zoe. Her face had gone ashen, her earlier hope replaced by fresh terror. She's coming. Her voice was barely audible. Mama's coming here. Yes. She's going to think I'm in trouble. She's going to think she's getting fired. Zoe's breathing quickened, panic rising. Sir, please, I can explain to her. I can tell her this was all my fault, that you were nice about it. Zoe. Damien kept his voice calm, gentle. Your mother is not getting fired. You're not in trouble. Neither is she. But I broke the rules. I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. I ate your food from the trash. You were hungry. That's not a crime. That's a failure on my part. Tears welled in Zoe's eyes again. I don't understand what's happening. I know, Damien said. And he did know. How could she understand? An hour ago, she'd been eating garbage. Now a billionaire was making phone calls that would change her entire life. It was too much, too fast, too impossible to process. He walked to one of the cabinets, hand-carved mahogany, imported from somewhere he couldn't remember, and opened it. Inside were glass jars filled with various items his chef kept stocked. He found what he was looking for, cookies. Expensive, artisan cookies from some bakery in Brooklyn that charged $6 each. He pulled out 3, put them on a small plate, and set them in front of Zoe. Then he poured her another glass of milk. "Eat," he said. "Your mother will be here in a few minutes." Zoe looked at the cookies like they might bite her. "Sir, I already ate the sandwich. This is too much. I shouldn't." "Zoe." He pulled out the stool next to her and sat down, bringing himself to her level. "I need you to understand something. What happened tonight, you being hungry, your family struggling, that's not your fault. It's not your mother's fault. It's mine." "How is it your fault? You didn't make Marcus sick." "No. But I created a situation where your mother felt she couldn't ask for help. Where she had to work herself to exhaustion and still couldn't feed her children. Where you had to eat from garbage in the home of a man who throws away more food in a day than you've eaten in a week." He paused, making sure she was listening. "That's on me. And I'm going to fix it. But we can't accept." "That's not your decision," Damien said, more firmly now. "You're 10 years old. You shouldn't have to make decisions about money or pride or what your family can or can't accept. That's for your mother and me to discuss." Zoe picked up one of the cookies with trembling fingers, but she didn't eat it. She just held it, staring at it like it held answers she couldn't find. Damien stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Manhattan spread below him, a constellation of light stretching to the horizon. Each light represented people, millions of them, living their lives, fighting their battles, carrying their burdens. He'd built his empire in this city. Hale Tech had started in a shared office space in Queens and grown into a tech giant with offices in 12 countries. He'd done it through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an ability to see opportunities others missed. But what had he actually built? Not just the company, what had he built with his life? A penthouse he barely lived in. Wealth he couldn't possibly spend. Possessions that meant nothing. And a reputation as a man who saw people as resources, who'd forgotten how to feel, who was slowly becoming his father. His father, Jonathan Hale, who'd built a pharmaceutical empire and died at his desk at 62. Damien had been at that funeral, had watched dozens of business associates pay respects to a man none of them had actually known. His father had been successful, wealthy, powerful. And absolutely alone. The only genuine grief at that funeral had come from Damien's mother, who'd spent 35 years married to a man who'd loved his company more than his family. She died 2 years later, officially from pneumonia, but Damien suspected it was really from loneliness. "I won't die like that," he whispered to his reflection in the window. "Sir." Zoe's small voice came from behind him. He turned. She'd eaten one of the cookies and was holding the second, looking at him with those two old eyes that had seen too much. "Nothing," he said. "Just thinking." Before Zoe could respond, they both heard it, footsteps in the hallway. Quick, worried footsteps that grew louder. Zoe went rigid. "That's Mama." The footsteps stopped just outside the kitchen door. There was a pause. Damien could imagine Elena on the other side, gathering courage, preparing herself for whatever disaster awaited. Then the door burst open. Elena Santos rushed into the kitchen, and Damien saw her clearly for the first time in 3 years. She was younger than he'd realized, maybe 35, though exhaustion made her look older. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a neat bun, was escaping in wisps around her face. She wore the plain black uniform all his housekeeping staff wore, but it hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight. A lot of weight. Her eyes, the same warm brown as Zoe's, were wide with panic as they darted around the kitchen. They landed first on Zoe, sitting at the island with cookies and milk, and her panic ratcheted higher. Then they found Damien, standing by the window in his bathrobe. The blood drained from her face. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice professionally controlled despite the fear beneath it. "I came as quickly as I could. Maria said you needed to see me. Is there a problem with my work? Is something wrong?" She was terrified. Damien could see it in every line of her body, in the way her hands twisted together, in the slight tremor of her voice that she was trying so hard to hide. Of course she was terrified. She'd been summoned at 3 a.m. to find her employer standing in the kitchen with her daughter, who should have been in the staff room doing homework. "Mr. Hale, I can explain," Elena started. "Why didn't you tell me?" Damien interrupted, his voice quiet but carrying across the kitchen. Elena froze. "Tell you what, sir." He stepped away from the window, moving closer but maintaining distance. He didn't want to intimidate her more than she already was. "That you were starving. That your son is dying. That you've been holding your family together with nothing but pride and willpower." All the color that had returned to Elena's face disappeared again. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Mama," Zoe's voice broke. "Mama, I'm sorry. I was so hungry, and I came upstairs, and Mr. Hale found me by the trash bins, and I told him about Marcus. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The words hit Elena like physical blows. Her professional mask, 3 years of perfect composure, of never showing weakness, of maintaining absolute control, finally cracked. "Oh, Mija," she whispered, and her voice carried such profound grief that Damien had to look away. "Oh, baby, what did you do?" "I was hungry," Zoe sobbed. "I was so hungry, Mama. And I know you haven't eaten either, and Marcus needs the medicine, and I just thought if I could eat the garbage food then you could have my oatmeal and—" "The garbage?" Elena's voice climbed. "You were eating from the garbage?" She swayed on her feet, and Damien saw it happening in slow motion, her knees buckling, her body tilting, her eyes rolling back slightly as weeks of exhaustion and stress and malnutrition caught up with her all at once. He moved without thinking, crossing the kitchen in 3 long strides. His hands caught her shoulders just as her legs gave way, supporting her weight as she crumpled. "I've got you," he said, guiding her toward the stool next to Zoe. "Elena, I've got you. Sit down." She collapsed onto the stool, her breathing rapid and shallow, her head hanging forward. Zoe was off her own stool in an instant, wrapping her small arms around her mother. "Mama, Mama, are you okay? Please be okay." "I'm fine," Elena whispered, but it was clearly a lie. She wasn't fine. She was the opposite of fine. She was a woman who'd been running on empty for so long she'd forgotten what full felt like. Damien grabbed another glass and filled it with water from the refrigerator. He set it in front of Elena. "Drink," he commanded, using the same tone he'd used with Zoe. Elena's hands shook as she lifted the glass, but she drank. Half of it disappeared in desperate gulps before she set it down. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice steadier now but still carrying the tremor of someone barely holding on. "I am so sorry. Zoe should never have been up here. She knows the rules. I take full responsibility for—" "Elena." Damien crouched down so he was at eye level with her. "Stop apologizing. You've done nothing wrong. My daughter was eating from your trash." Her voice broke on the word trash. "That's everything wrong. That's failure. That's my failure," Damien said firmly. "Not yours." Elena stared at him, confusion and fear and exhaustion warring in her eyes. "I don't understand." "I know. But you will." He stood, giving her space. "First, I need you to listen. Can you do that?" She nodded mutely, one arm wrapped protectively around Zoe, who was still clinging to her. "I found Zoe about 40 minutes ago," Damien began. "She was by the trash bins, and yes, she was eating food that had been thrown away. Do you know why?" Elena's face crumpled. "Because I failed her. Because I couldn't provide. Because your son has leukemia," Damien continued. "Because you've been working 3 jobs to pay for his treatment. Because you sold everything you owned, your car, your furniture, your late husband's possessions. Because you moved to a smaller apartment to save money. Because you've been skipping meals so your children could eat. Because the medical bills are $47,000 and climbing. Because Marcus needs experimental treatment that costs $144,000. Because you've been doing everything humanly possible to save your son's life, and it still wasn't enough. With each sentence, Elena shrank further, her professional composure dissolving into raw pain. How did you, she whispered. How do you know? Zoe told me. She showed me Marcus's picture. At her brother's name, Zoe pulled the worn photograph from her pocket and held it out to her mother. Elena took it with shaking hands, staring at the image of her son in his Captain America bandana. She was eating garbage to save you a meal, Damien said, softer now. And you've been starving yourself to save him. And through all of this, you came to work every single day with a smile on your face and never asked for help. Why? Elena looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw the full weight of what she'd been carrying. Not just the fear and exhaustion, but the pride, the dignity, the desperate need to maintain control when everything was falling apart. Because people like you don't help people like us, she said simply. Because I'm just the maid. Because my problems aren't your problems. Because if I showed weakness, if I asked for anything, I'd lose this job, and it's the only thing keeping Marcus alive. The words hung in the air between them, brutal in their honesty. You're right, Damien said, and watched Elena's face fall further. That's exactly how I've been. That's exactly the kind of man I became. The kind who doesn't see. The kind who doesn't care. The kind who lets a child eat garbage in his home because he's too blind to notice his employees are drowning. He pulled out his phone and set it on the counter between them. But that ends tonight, he said. I've made 3 phone calls in the last hour. Do you want to know what they were about? Elena stared at the phone like it might explode. Damien took a breath and met her eyes. The first call was to my personal physician. Marcus's medical bills, all of them, are being paid. Tonight. Right now. And he's being transferred to the best pediatric oncologist in the city. He'll receive whatever treatment he needs, including the experimental drugs. Cost is not a factor. Elena's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The second call was to my lawyer. Your salary is being doubled, effective immediately. You're receiving comprehensive health insurance with no deductibles or copays, covering your entire family. And there's now a college fund for your children with $200,000 in it. A small, choked sound escaped Elena's throat. The third call was to have you brought here so I could tell you this myself. For a long moment, Elena just stared at him. Then she started shaking her head. No, she whispered. No, I can't. We can't accept that. It's too much. It's... Her voice broke completely. She stood abruptly, swaying slightly, pulling Zoe with her. Mr. Hale, I'm grateful, truly, but we're not charity cases. I work for my money. I've always worked. I can't just take. This isn't charity, Damien said. This is correction. This is me finally seeing what's been in front of me all along and taking responsibility for my blindness. But... Elena. He waited until she met his eyes. Your son is 7 years old, and he's fighting for his life. Your daughter was eating garbage. You've sold everything, sacrificed everything, and it still wasn't enough. Not because you failed, but because the system failed you. I failed you. Tears were streaming down Elena's face now, and she wasn't bothering to wipe them away. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said, her voice raw. Why would you help us? You don't even know us. Damien looked at her, at Zoe still clinging to her mother, at the photograph of Marcus clutched in Elena's shaking hand. He thought of his empty penthouse, his wasted food, his blind eyes and closed heart. Because I just remembered what it means to be human, he said. And I have no intention of forgetting again. Elena's knees buckled again, but this time, it wasn't from exhaustion or malnutrition. It was from hope, pure, overwhelming, impossible hope finally being allowed to exist after months of suffocating it to survive. This time, both Damien and Zoe moved to catch her. Both Damien and Zoe caught Elena as her knees buckled, but it was Damien who bore most of her weight. She was lighter than he'd expected, alarmingly light, all sharp angles and trembling exhaustion beneath the shapeless uniform. He guided her carefully to one of the kitchen stools, supporting her elbow as she sank down. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, tears streaming unchecked down her face. She was trying to speak, to apologize, to maintain the professional composure she'd worn like armor for 3 years. "I'm sorry, sir," she managed between gasps. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to burden you with this. I never wanted." "Elena." Damien's voice was gentle but firm. "Stop apologizing." But she couldn't. The apologies kept coming, reflexive and desperate, as if saying them enough times might somehow make this disaster manageable. "I should have controlled her better. I should have made sure she stayed downstairs. I should have." Zoe rushed to her mother, wrapping her small arms around Elena's waist and burying her face in the black uniform. "Mama, don't. Please don't apologize. This is my fault. I broke the rules. I got caught. I'm the one who—" "No, Mija, this is on me. I'm your mother. I should have provided better. I should have." "Both of you, stop." Damien pulled out another stool and sat down, positioning himself at their level. "Neither of you did anything wrong. Do you understand me?" "Not one thing." Elena looked at him with red-rimmed eyes, disbelief and exhaustion warring in her expression. "Mr. Hale, my daughter was eating from the garbage. In your home. How is that not wrong?" "Because she was hungry," Damien said simply. "And the fact that she was hungry while working in a home that throws away more food than some families see in a month, that's the actual wrong. That's on me." Elena shook her head, but before she could protest again, Damien continued. "Tell me everything. From the beginning. I need to understand the full picture." For a long moment, Elena just stared at him, her hands twisted together in her lap, her whole body trembling. Then, slowly, the dam broke. "It started 9 months ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus got sick. At first, I thought it was just a bad cold, maybe the flu. But he kept getting worse. Fevers that wouldn't break. Bruises that appeared from nowhere. He was so tired all the time, sleeping 16 hours a day." She paused, swallowing hard. Zoe remained pressed against her side, silent now, listening to a story she'd lived but never heard told like this. "I took him to the clinic," Elena continued. "They did blood work. Said his white cell count was off. Sent us to St. Catherine's for more tests." Her voice cracked. "That's when they told us. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. All. A kind of blood cancer." Damien listened, his chest tightening with each word. "The timing." Elena laughed bitterly. "God, the timing. My husband Luis had died just 2 weeks before. Heart attack. He was only 38. Just collapsed one day at work. No warning, no history of heart problems. Just gone." "I'm sorry," Damien said, and meant it. He didn't have life insurance. We'd been meaning to get it, but it was expensive, and we kept putting it off. We had student loans from his degree, he was going to be a teacher, and we were paying those down first. We thought we had time." She wiped at her eyes with shaking hands. "We always think we have time." Zoe pressed closer to her mother, and Elena wrapped an arm around her daughter, anchoring herself. "So I was left with 2 kids, no savings, a pile of medical debt from Luis's emergency room visit, and now Marcus needed cancer treatment. The hospital bills started immediately. The first round of chemo alone was $18,000. Insurance covered about half. The numbers fell like stones into still water, each one sending ripples of impact through Damien's understanding. I was working 3 cleaning jobs before, Elena continued. Office buildings mostly, a couple of houses. When I saw the posting for this position, head of housekeeping for a private residence, the salary was more than all 3 jobs combined. I thought it was the answer. I could work 1 job, make more money, have better insurance, spend more time with the kids. And? Damien prompted gently. And it helped. For a while. But the bills kept coming. Every week, new bills. The chemo made Marcus so sick he needed additional medications. Anti-nausea drugs, antibiotics for infections, blood transfusions. Each one cost hundreds, thousands. The insurance kept denying things, calling them not medically necessary. Her voice turned bitter. As if my 7-year-old having cancer wasn't necessary enough. She took a shuddering breath. 6 months ago, the hospital gave us an ultimatum. Pay $15,000 immediately or they'd stop Marcus's treatment. So I sold our car. Got $3,200 for it. It wasn't enough, so I sold my wedding ring. Her hand unconsciously went to her bare ring finger. Luis's mother gave it to me. It had been in their family for 3 generations. Got $850 for it. Damien felt something twist in his chest. 4 months ago, I sold the furniture. Most of it was from Luis. His chair, the one he used to read to the kids in every night. His desk. Our dining table. Everything. Got $1,100. It bought us about 3 weeks. She laughed again, hollow and broken. 3 weeks of treatment for a table we'd eaten 1,000 meals at. Mama loved that table, Zoe whispered into her mother's side. I loved Marcus more, Elena said simply. Then I pawned Luis's guitar. He played every Sunday, taught himself when he was a teenager. Used to say music was cheaper than therapy. A tear rolled down her cheek. I got $200 for 20 years of his music. The catalogue of losses continued, each sacrifice adding weight to the pile. Damien sat silently, bearing witness to a kind of suffering he'd never imagined existed in his orbit. 3 months ago, we moved. From our 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood to a studio in. She paused. Well, it's not safe. There are rats. The windows don't close properly, so it's freezing in winter. I hear gunshots sometimes at night. But it saves $600 a month, so. So it was worth it, Damien finished. Everything is worth it if it keeps Marcus alive. Elena's voice had dropped to a monotone now, the emotion wrung out by sheer exhaustion. I started picking up every extra shift I could. Working here during the day, then coming back at night when you were at the office. Cleaning offices on my days off. 70, 80 hours a week. Sometimes more. That's when the food became a problem, she continued, and Damien saw her hands tighten into fists. There just wasn't enough money. After rent, after the medical bills, after the bus fare and utilities, there was maybe $100 left for food. For a whole month. For 3 people. Damien did the quick math. That was roughly $1 per person per day. I started skipping meals, Elena said. Just a little at first. Told myself I wasn't hungry, that I'd eat later. Then it became easier. I'd give Zoe and Marcus whatever I'd packed for lunch, tell them I'd already eaten. Make dinner for them, say I'd had a big lunch. She looked down at herself, at the uniform hanging loose on her frame. I lost 30 pounds in 4 months. People here started asking if I was sick. I told them I was just stressed, not sleeping well. Which was true. I wasn't sleeping. How could I sleep when I was calculating how many days we could stretch a bag of rice? Mama, Zoe whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. I started fainting during shifts, Elena admitted. Just little dizzy spells at first. Then full blackouts. I'd wake up on the floor of whatever room I was cleaning and hope no one had seen. Blame it on standing up too fast or forgetting to drink water. She turned to look at Damien directly for the first time since starting her story. But I couldn't let Marcus know. He's 7 years old and fighting cancer. He's so brave, Mr. Hale. So incredibly brave. He gets chemo that makes him violently ill, and he smiles and tells the nurses jokes. He loses his hair and decorates bandanas like superhero masks. He has needles in his arms every day and never complains. Her voice broke completely. How could I let him know his mother couldn't feed his sister? How could I burden him with that when he's already fighting for his life? In the silence that followed, Zoe's small voice spoke up. I knew, Mama. Elena's head whipped toward her daughter. What? I knew you weren't eating. I heard your stomach at night. I saw how you got thinner and thinner. I watched you give me your portions and pretend you'd already had yours. Zoe's face crumpled. I wasn't fooled, Mama. I was just too scared to say anything. Mija. That's why I started coming to the kitchen, Zoe continued, the words rushing out now. 3 weeks ago. I thought if I could find food here, if I could eat the things that were going to be thrown away anyway, then you could have my portions. The oatmeal, the rice, whatever we had. You could eat it instead of pretending. Elena made a sound like she'd been physically struck. I wanted to help, Zoe sobbed. I wanted to do something. But I'm just a kid. I can't work. I can't make money. All I could do was eat less so you could eat more. And then I thought about the trash here, all the food that gets thrown away, and I thought. She dissolved into tears, unable to continue. Elena pulled her daughter close, both of them crying now, holding each other with the desperate grip of people who'd been drowning together for months. Damien sat across from them, feeling the full weight of his blindness crash down on him. This had been happening. Right here. In his home. While he'd worried about quarterly earnings and market share and board politics, this had been happening. Zoe, he said softly. The girl looked up at him with streaming eyes. You carry no guilt in this. None. You're 10 years old. The fact that you felt you had to choose between your own hunger and your mother's, that you felt responsible for your family's survival, that's a failure of adults. Of systems. Of me. He turned to Elena. And you. Elena, look at me. She raised her tear-stained face. You're not a burden, he said, and his voice carried a weight of conviction that surprised even him. You're a mother doing everything humanly possible to save your son. Everything. You've sacrificed your possessions, your health, your safety, your dignity. You've given until there was nothing left to give, and then you gave more. But I should have. You should have nothing, Damien interrupted. You did everything right. The shame here, all of it, is mine. He stood, walking to the window again because he needed to move, needed to do something with the energy coursing through him. I throw away more food in a day than you eat in a week. I have 8 staff members whose functions I know but whose lives are mysteries. I sleep on sheets that cost $10,000 while you sleep in a studio with rats and broken windows. He turned back to face them. I found your 10-year-old daughter eating from my garbage, Elena. In my house. While I live in absurd luxury and worry about things that don't matter. The shame, all of it, is mine. Elena shook her head. You didn't know. I didn't know because I didn't ask. Because I didn't see. Because I created an environment where you felt you couldn't ask for help, where showing weakness meant losing the job that kept your son alive. His voice rough with emotion. That's on me. That's my failure. For a long moment, they sat in the kind of silence that follows profound truth-telling. Then Elena spoke, her voice small and uncertain. You said you made phone calls. Yes. About Marcus's medical bills? All of them. Past, present, and future. Dr. Rothstein is arranging his transfer to a better facility. He'll be under the care of the best pediatric oncologist in the city. Elena's breath caught. And, the experimental treatment. The targeted therapy. Whatever he needs. Cost is not a factor. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Mr. Hale, that could be over $200,000. I don't care if it's $2 million. He gets what he needs. Elena made a choked sound, half sob, half disbelieving laugh. We can't accept. Your salary has been doubled, effective immediately, Damien continued. You have comprehensive family health insurance now. No deductibles, no co-pays, no coverage limits. Experimental treatments included. And there's a college fund for both children. $200,000 to start, structured for growth. Elena was shaking her head violently now. No. No, it's too much. I can't take charity. I'm not a charity case, Mr. Hale. I work for my money. I've always worked. This isn't charity, Damien said firmly. This is correction. This is me finally seeing what's been in front of me all along. This is taking responsibility for my part in a system that let you fall through the cracks. But why? Elena's voice cracked on the word. Why would you do this? You don't even know us. We're nothing to you. I'm just the maid who cleans your floors. Why would you care? Damien looked at Zoe, still clutching Marcus's photograph in her small hand. He thought of Catherine's words from 2 years ago. He thought of his father dying alone at his desk. He thought of the napkin from 22 years ago, technology should serve humanity. Because I just remembered what it means to be human, he said simply. And I've been something less than that for a long time. You and Zoe and Marcus, you reminded me. Elena stared at him, searching his face for deception or ulterior motive and finding none. Slowly, disbelief gave way to something else. Something fragile and terrifying and beautiful. Hope. Can I? She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. The screen was cracked, held together with tape. Can I show you something? Of course. She swiped through her photos, and Damien saw a chronicle of loss and love. Marcus before the diagnosis, a vibrant boy with bright eyes and an infectious grin, kicking a soccer ball in a park. Marcus at his 7th birthday party, blowing out candles with his sister beside him. Then the hospital photos. Marcus getting thinner, paler. But always smiling. Always brave. The most recent photos showed him in a hospital bed, wearing different bandanas, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. His head was bald, his face gaunt, but his eyes still held that spark. This is from yesterday, Elena said, showing him the latest image. Marcus held up a piece of paper with a crayon drawing. Stick figures holding hands, a woman, a girl, and a smaller boy. Above them, written in careful child handwriting, "We're stronger together." He drew that for me, Elena whispered. Said it was to remind me that we're a team. That we can beat anything if we stick together. Her voice broke. 7 years old, and he's trying to keep my spirits up. Damien stared at the drawing, at this child's belief in the power of family, in resilience, in hope despite everything. He never complains, Elena said. Not once. The nurses say he's their favorite patient. He tells jokes, shares his bandanas with other kids, draws pictures for the staff. 7 years old and fighting cancer, and he's worried about making other people feel better. Something crystallized in Damien's mind. A decision that felt more right than any business deal he'd ever made. I want to meet him, he said. Elena looked up, confused. Sir. Marcus. I want to meet him. Today, actually. He glanced at his watch, 3:17 a.m., in a few hours. I'll send a car at 10 a.m. We'll go to St. Catherine's together. You want to visit Marcus? Elena's voice carried disbelief. If we're going to help him fight, I should know who I'm fighting for. Fresh tears spilled down Elena's cheeks, but these were different. These carried relief, gratitude, and that dangerous, fragile hope. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, Mr. Hale. Damien, he corrected gently. Just Damien. He stood, and Elena and Zoe rose as well, both unsteady on their feet from exhaustion and emotional overload. Go home now, Damien said. Both of you. Rest. The car will pick you up at 9:45. Elena nodded, then paused. Mr. Hale, Damien, where should we meet you? The service entrance or? The front entrance, Damien interrupted firmly. You're my guests now, Elena. Not my employees. Use the front door. He watched the meaning of those words sink in. The service entrance was for staff, for people who were meant to be invisible, functional, separate. The front entrance was for people who mattered. Elena's professional mask, the one she'd worn for 3 years, the one that had cracked tonight, finally shattered completely. She wasn't the maid anymore. She was a mother whose child might live, a woman who might stop starving, a person who'd been seen. Come on, Mija, she said to Zoe, her voice thick with tears. Let's go home. Damien walked them to the front entrance, through the marble foyer with its expensive art and designer furniture. He opened the massive oak door himself, something he couldn't remember ever doing. Outside, the city was beginning to wake. The sky held that pre-dawn purple that meant morning was coming. Street lights still glowed, but their light seemed softer now, less harsh. Elena and Zoe stepped out into the cool air, and for a moment, they just stood there, as if crossing this threshold meant crossing into a different world. A world where help existed. Where burdens could be shared. Where a billionaire might remember his humanity and use it to save a 7-year-old boy's life. 10 a.m., Damien reminded them. Front entrance. We'll be here, Elena promised. Then, after a hesitation, she added, thank you. For seeing us. Damien watched them walk down the steps and disappear into the early morning. Only when they were out of sight did he close the door and lean against it, his own exhaustion finally catching up with him. In his pocket, his phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Rothstein, St. Catherine's contacted. Marcus Santos being transferred to Dr. Sarah Kim, best pediatric oncologist in the city. All bills cleared. Surgery scheduled pending evaluation. You're making a difference. A difference. Such a simple phrase for something so profound. Damien looked around his empty foyer, at the wealth and luxury that had meant nothing until tonight. Then he climbed the stairs to his bedroom, knowing that when he woke in a few hours, everything would be different. He was done being a machine. The work of being human was just beginning. At 9:45 a.m., James pulled the black Mercedes to a stop in front of an apartment complex that looked like Hope had abandoned it years ago. Damien stared out the tinted window, taking in details he'd never noticed from the isolated comfort of his usual routes through the city. Cracked sidewalks with weeds pushing through the concrete. A broken elevator with an out of order sign that looked permanent. Graffiti covering the lower walls, some artistic, most just angry scrawls. Windows with bars on them, several boarded up. A cluster of men on the corner who watched the expensive car with hard, calculating eyes. This was where Elena lived. Where she brought Zoe home after working triple shifts in his penthouse. Where they'd moved to save $600 a month, money that had bought Marcus maybe 3 more days of treatment. The door to the building opened, and Elena emerged with Zoe beside her. They were dressed in what Damien recognized as their best, clothes that had clearly been carefully maintained but couldn't hide their age. Elena wore a simple blue dress that hung loose on her thin frame, her hair pulled back neatly. Zoe had on a pink sweater with a small patch on the elbow and black pants that were slightly too short. They'd dressed up for this. For him. For Marcus. James exited the car smoothly and opened the rear door. Elena stopped several feet away, hesitating. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice carrying that same uncertainty from last night. "You didn't have to come yourself. You could have just sent the car. We would have understood." Damien met her eyes. "Yes, I did." Elena and Zoe slid into the back seat, perching on the edge of the leather upholstery as if afraid they might damage it. The car smelled of expensive leather and subtle cologne, worlds away from the world they'd just left. As James pulled smoothly into traffic, silence filled the car. Not the comfortable silence of familiarity, but the awkward quiet of people from different universes trying to occupy the same space. Zoe pressed her face to the window, watching the city slide past. Damien noticed how her eyes tracked everything: the cafes with outdoor seating, the boutique shops, the people in business suits carrying expensive coffee. A world she lived in but rarely experienced from this angle. "Marcus," Elena said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her hands twisted in her lap. "He's very thin right now. The chemo, it makes him so sick he can barely keep anything down. He's lost a lot of weight." "Elena," Damien started. "And he might be tired," she continued, the words tumbling out. "Sometimes he sleeps most of the day. The treatment exhausts him. So if he's asleep when we get there, we shouldn't wake him. His body needs the rest." "We won't wake him," Damien assured her. "And the hair loss. He's self-conscious about it, even though he pretends he's not. That's why he wears the bandanas. He calls them his superhero masks, but I know." "Elena." Damien's voice was gentle but firm. "It's okay. I'm not here to judge how Marcus looks or how tired he is. I'm here to help. That's all." Elena nodded, but her hands didn't stop twisting. She was a mother bringing a stranger to see her dying child, and no amount of money or promises could erase the vulnerability of that. The drive took 20 minutes through morning traffic. When James pulled up to St. Catherine's Hospital, Damien felt a knot form in his chest. The building was large and modern, but there was something about hospitals, the way they tried so hard to look cheerful while housing so much pain. They entered through the main doors and followed Elena to the pediatric oncology wing on the 4th floor. The elevator ride was silent, each floor ding marking their ascent into a world Damien had never entered. The 4th floor hit him like a wall. It smelled of antiseptic and artificial air freshener attempting to mask something underneath: fear, maybe, or grief, or the particular scent of bodies fighting battles they shouldn't have to fight. The walls were painted in bright, cheerful colors and covered with murals of cartoon characters and rainbows. But the brightness felt forced, like putting a happy face sticker on a wound. A nurse at the station looked up as they approached. Her face brightened when she saw Elena. "Mrs. Santos. Back already? You were just here last night." "I come when I can," Elena said softly. "Every day," the nurse told Damien, her tone carrying both admiration and sadness. "During her lunch break, after work, weekends. We've never had a mother more devoted." She paused, looking at Damien curiously. "And you are?" "A friend," Damien said, surprising himself with the word. "I'm here to visit Marcus." "Room 418, the nurse said. "He's awake. Had breakfast about an hour ago, well, tried to. He's having a rough morning with the nausea." Elena's face tightened with worry, but she led the way down the hall. Other rooms they passed had similar scenes: children with bald heads, IVs attached to thin arms, parents with exhausted eyes keeping vigil. This was a wing of warriors, Damien realized. Small warriors fighting impossible battles. Room 418 had a handmade sign on the door: Marcus's Fortress of Awesome. Below it, smaller letters added, "Superheroes Welcome." Elena knocked softly and pushed the door open. "Mama." The voice was weak but filled with genuine joy. Marcus Santos lay in a hospital bed that seemed far too large for his small frame. Damien's first thought was how accurate Elena's description had been. The boy was thin, painfully so, his cheekbones prominent and his arms like delicate branches. An 4-line ran into his left arm, and various monitors beeped softly around him. But what struck Damien most was Marcus's eyes. Bright, intelligent, alive. And his smile, the kind of smile that seemed impossible given the circumstances, yet there it was, radiant and genuine. He wore a Captain America bandana tied around his head, the red and white stripes and blue star bright against his brown skin. In his arms, he clutched a stuffed lion that had clearly seen better days, its mane worn from being held too many times. Mama! Zoe! Marcus's face lit up as Elena and Zoe rushed to his bedside. Elena kissed his forehead while Zoe carefully hugged him, mindful of the 4. Then Marcus's eyes found Damien, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Who's that?" "This is Mr. Hale," Elena said, her voice catching slightly. He's Mama's boss. He wanted to meet you." Marcus studied Damien with the frank, assessing gaze children have before they learn to hide their thoughts. "Hello, sir. Did you come all this way just to see me?" Damien stepped into the room, his throat suddenly tight. "Yes, Marcus. I did." The boy's smile grew impossibly wider. "That's so cool. Nobody ever comes to visit except Mama and Zoe. Well, and the nurses, but they have to come because it's their job." He gestured to the chair beside his bed. "You can sit down if you want. Do you want to see my drawings?" "I'd love to," Damien said, taking the offered chair. The room was a gallery of Marcus's artwork. Drawings covered every available surface, taped to the walls, pinned to a corkboard, scattered across the rolling table beside his bed. Superheroes in action poses, dinosaurs in vivid colors, stick figure families holding hands. Each drawing was labeled in careful child handwriting. "That's Superman fighting a dragon," Marcus explained, pointing to one on the wall. "And that's a T-Rex because they're awesome. And that one is me and Mama and Zoe. See? We're all holding hands because we're a team." "They're wonderful," Damien said, and meant it. There was something about these drawings, the hope in them, the life, the refusal to give up even while creating them from a hospital bed. On the nightstand beside Marcus's bed was a stack of library books, Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Zoe saw Damien looking at them. "I bring him new ones every week," she said quietly. "From the library near our old apartment. The librarian saves the good ones for him. Reading helps me forget I'm sick," Marcus explained. "When I'm reading about wizards or demigods, I don't think about the chemo or the needles or throwing up." A knock on the door interrupted them. A nurse entered, a young black woman with kind eyes and colorful scrubs covered in cartoon characters. "How's my favorite superhero today?" she asked cheerfully. "Good." Marcus replied with genuine enthusiasm. "I only threw up twice this morning instead of 3 times." He said it like an achievement, like something to be proud of. The nurse smiled and ruffled his bandana affectionately. "That's progress, buddy. Let's check your vitals, okay?" As the nurse worked, taking blood pressure and temperature and checking the 4, Damien watched Marcus. The boy didn't flinch at the thermometer or complain about having to sit still. He just chatted with the nurse about the book he was reading, telling her the plot with animated gestures despite his obvious exhaustion. This child treated survival as victory. Every small improvement, throwing up twice instead of 3 times, keeping down breakfast, staying awake for an hour, was celebrated. No self-pity. No complaints. Just fierce, determined bravery wrapped in a 7-year-old body. When the nurse left, Marcus turned his attention back to Damien. "Mama says you make computers think. Is that like magic?" Damien couldn't help but smile. "Sometimes it feels like magic. But it's really just teaching computers to solve problems and learn from their mistakes. That's so cool, Marcus breathed. I want to do that when I grow up. I want to make computers that help sick kids. Like, computers that can predict when the chemo will make you sick so the doctors can give you medicine before it happens. Or computers that can find new treatments faster. His eyes were bright with excitement. That way other kids won't have to be scared like I was when I first got here. 7 years old and fighting cancer, and he was already thinking about helping others. Damien felt something crack open in his chest, that place Catherine had accused him of losing, the place that remembered empathy and purpose beyond profit. I think that's a wonderful goal, Damien said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite hide. Will you teach me? Marcus asked. When I'm better. About computers? When you're better, Damien promised, I'll teach you everything I know. Another knock on the door. This time, a woman in a white coat entered. She was in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a bun and intelligent eyes behind frameless glasses. Her name tag read, Dr. Sarah Kim, Pediatric Oncology. Elena, she greeted warmly, then her eyes widened slightly when she saw Damien. And you must be Mr. Hale. I received the call from Dr. Rothstein this morning. Could I speak with you privately? Damien asked. Elena should join us. Dr. Kim nodded. Of course. Elena? In the hallway, with the door closed behind them, Dr. Kim's professional warmth shifted to clinical honesty. I'm going to be direct, she said. Marcus is a fighter, and he's been responding to the standard chemotherapy protocol. But not as well as we'd hoped. The cancer is persistent. What are his chances? Damien asked. With the current treatment? Dr. Kim hesitated. 60%. Maybe 65 if we're lucky. Which sounds reasonable until you're the parent of the child and that other 35%. Elena's face had gone pale, her hand pressed to her mouth. The experimental treatment, Damien said. The targeted therapy. What are his chances with that? Much better. 85 to 90% survival rate in clinical trials for his type of all. It's not approved yet, but the data is extremely promising. Why isn't he on it already? Cost, Dr. Kim said bluntly. $12,000 per dose. He needs at least 12 doses, possibly more depending on response. That's $144,000 minimum, and insurance companies won't cover experimental treatments. But with the new insurance Mr. Hale arranged, Elena started. Even with better insurance, getting approval for experimental drugs takes months. Appeals, reviews, second opinions. Marcus might not have months. Damien pulled out his phone and opened his contacts. He found David Chen's number and tapped it before Dr. Kim could continue. David answered on the first ring. David, I need you to set up a direct payment account. St. Catherine's Hospital, Pediatric Oncology, Dr. Sarah Kim. Whatever she needs for Marcus Santos's treatment bills directly to my personal account. No insurance company involvement, no approval process, no delays. He handed the phone to Dr. Kim. Tell my lawyer exactly what you need. Dr. Kim took the phone, her professional composure slipping into shock. For the next 3 minutes, Damien watched as she detailed the treatment protocol, the costs, the timeline. When she handed the phone back, her hands were shaking slightly. Mr. Hale, she said carefully. Do you understand what you're committing to? The full treatment could exceed $200,000. There are no guarantees. It might not work. I understand perfectly, Damien said. The question isn't about money. The question is, when can we start? Dr. Kim stared at him for a long moment, then her professional mask cracked into something approaching awe. We could begin within 48 hours. I need to order the drug, schedule the protocol, prep Marcus's body. But, 48 hours. Then do it. They returned to Marcus's room. The boy looked up hopefully as they entered, his small face anxious. "Am I in trouble?" he asked, his voice small. "Did my counts get worse?" "No, baby," Elena said, rushing to his side. "No, you're not in trouble." Dr. Kim pulled up a chair to sit at Marcus's level. "Marcus, we're going to try a new medicine. A special one that's even better at fighting the cancer." Marcus's eyes widened. "Really? The good medicine? The one that actually works?" "Yes," Dr. Kim confirmed. "We're going to start it in 2 days." "But..." Marcus looked confused. "Mama, you said we couldn't afford the good medicine. You said insurance wouldn't pay for it." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Damien, silently asking permission. He nodded. "Mr. Hale is helping us, Mija," Elena said softly. "He's making sure you get the medicine you need." Marcus turned to Damien, his young face serious. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. I promise I'll pay you back when I grow up. I'll work really hard and save my money and..." "Marcus." Damien had to pause, his throat too tight to speak. He knelt beside the bed so he was eye level with the boy. "You don't owe me anything. You just focus on getting strong. Okay?" "Okay," Marcus whispered. Then, after a pause, "But when I'm a computer genius like you, I'm going to help other kids. Kids whose mamas can't afford the good medicine. I'm going to make sure they get it too." Damien had negotiated with CEOs and senators. He'd pitched to venture capitalists and argued with board members. He'd never once found himself speechless. Until now. "I think," he said finally, his voice rough, "you're already braver than I've ever been." Marcus smiled, that impossible, radiant smile, and clutched his worn lion tighter. "This is brave. Papa gave him to me before he died. Mama says Papa would be proud of me." "He would be," Damien said. "I'm sure of it." Within minutes, the excitement of the news had exhausted Marcus. His eyes began to droop, his small body sinking deeper into the pillows. "I'm kind of tired," he admitted. "Is it okay if I sleep?" "Of course, baby," Elena said, kissing his forehead. "We'll come back tomorrow. Promise?" "Promise." Marcus's eyes closed, his breathing evening out almost immediately. In sleep, he looked even smaller, even more fragile. But he was smiling, brave, the lion tucked under his chin. In the hallway, Damien looked back through the window at the small boy in the big bed. Elena stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. "He's extraordinary," Damien said. "He's everything," Elena whispered. "He's why I kept going when I wanted to give up. Why I kept working when I could barely stand. He's my reason. He's why I'm changing everything," Damien said, and realized as he said it that it was true. This wasn't just about one family anymore. It was about all the families like Elena's, the ones working 3 jobs and still falling short, the ones making impossible choices between food and medicine, the ones slipping through the cracks of a system that people like him had built. Marcus Santos, 7 years old and wearing a Captain America bandana, had reminded Damien Hale what it meant to be human. Now Damien had to figure out what to do with that reminder. As they walked back to the car, Damien pulled out his phone and began making a list. Not a business plan. Not a strategy document. A promise. To Marcus. To Elena. To Zoe. To every family drowning while billionaires slept on $10,000 sheets. The work of being human had just begun. At 2 p.m., Damien stood in the middle of his penthouse living room and saw it clearly for the first time in years. It was obscene. 8,000 square feet of imported marble and custom furniture. A chandelier that cost more than most people made in a year. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view he rarely looked at. Art on the walls he'd bought because his decorator said it would make a statement, but couldn't name the artists. Every surface gleaming, every corner perfect, every room empty of anything resembling life. He couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's hospital room. Maybe 10 by 10 feet. Cheerful dinosaur stickers covering institutional beige walls. A single window looking out at a parking lot. Medical equipment beeping constant reminders of mortality. And in the middle of it all, a 7-year-old boy with a Captain America bandana and a smile that could light the world. Marcus had more in that tiny room than Damien had in 8,000 square feet. Love. Purpose. Hope. Courage. All the things money couldn't buy, and Damien had somehow convinced himself didn't matter. He walked through his penthouse, seeing it differently now. The home gym, $200,000 of equipment gathering dust. The library, thousands of unread books bought by the collection. The formal dining room, tables set for 12 people who never came. The guest suites, beds that were never slept in, perfectly made by people whose names he hadn't bothered to learn. Every luxury felt like an accusation. While Marcus fought for his life in a hospital bed, Damien had been sleeping on $10,000 sheets and complaining about insomnia. While Elena sold her wedding ring for $850, Damien had been wearing a watch that cost $40,000. While Zoe ate garbage, Damien had been throwing away more food in a day than they ate in a week. The shame of it was physically painful. He pulled out his phone and called the house management system. I need all staff in the formal living room at 3 p.m. Everyone. No exceptions. Sir, is there a problem? The voice on the other end, Maria, he thought, or maybe Sophia, carried worry. No problem. Just make sure everyone's there. He ended the call and looked around his empty palace. It was time to stop being a ghost in his own life. At 3 p.m., 8 people filed nervously into the formal living room. They'd never been allowed in this room. It was for guests, important guests, the kind who appeared in business magazines and on boards of directors. The staff knew their place: kitchens, service hallways, back stairs. Not the formal living room with its uncomfortable modern furniture and abstract art that cost more than their annual salaries. They stood in a cluster near the doorway, none of them willing to sit without explicit permission. Damien recognized them all, could name their functions. But their names? Their lives? He was ashamed at how little he actually knew. Chef André, mid-50s, French accent, impeccable references. Maid meals Damien barely touched. Maya, young, quiet, assisted André. Early 20s, maybe. He wasn't sure. 3 housekeepers whose names and faces he mixed up constantly. They kept everything pristine while remaining invisible. James, his driver. Mid-40s, always punctual, never spoke unless spoken to. Robert, head of security. Former military, efficient, professional. Elena was absent, she'd stayed at the hospital with Marcus, unwilling to leave him even though Damien had assured her job was secure. The staff looked terrified. Emergency meetings meant bad news. Firings, budget cuts, restructuring. They stood with the rigid posture of people bracing for impact. Damien didn't sit behind his desk. Didn't position himself above them. He stood among them, in the middle of the room, and let the silence stretch until everyone was looking at him. I owe all of you an apology, he began. Confusion rippled through the group. That wasn't how these meetings started. Last night, Damien continued, his voice steady but carrying weight, I found Elena's daughter eating from the garbage. Her 10-year-old daughter. In my kitchen. Do you understand what I'm saying? A child was so hungry that she was eating food I'd thrown away. The housekeepers exchanged glances. André's face paled. Maya put a hand over her mouth. I realized something last night, Damien said. I don't know any of you. Not really. I know your functions, who cooks my food, who drives my car, who cleans my floors. But I don't know your lives. Your struggles. Your families. And that's not just negligence. That's cruelty. He let the words sink in, watched them process what he was saying. So I want to change that. Starting right now. He turned to Andre. Chef. Tell me about yourself. Not your resume. Your life. Andre looked startled, then uncomfortable. Sir, I don't understand what you're asking. Your family. Your responsibilities outside this kitchen. What keeps you up at night? Andre hesitated, years of professional boundaries warring with direct orders. Finally, he spoke. My mother. She has dementia. Advanced stage. She's in a care facility in Queens. The good kind, where they treat residents like people instead of inventory. His voice wavered. It costs $8,000 a month. My salary here covers it, but there's nothing left after. I live in a studio, take the subway, eat leftovers from the kitchen. But she's safe. She's comfortable. That's what matters. Damien felt the information land like a weight. $8,000 a month. Andre was one of his highest paid staff, and he was barely surviving. Maya, Damien said, turning to the young assistant chef. You have a daughter? Maya nodded, surprised he knew. Yes, sir. Isabella. She's 5. She has severe asthma. Tell me about that. She needs a nebulizer 3 times a day, sometimes more if she's having an attack. The medications are expensive, one of her inhalers costs $400 a month even with insurance. I work here, then I work nights at a diner in Brooklyn because it's closer to our apartment. My neighbor watches Bella while I'm gone. Tears welled in her eyes. I haven't been able to afford the preventive medication the doctor wants her on. We just manage the attacks when they happen. Last month, she went to the ER twice. 2 ER visits for a 5-year-old because her mother couldn't afford preventive medication. Damien went around the room. Each person, each story. Sophia, one of the housekeepers, sending $500 a month to her family in the Philippines. Hadn't seen her parents or younger siblings in 4 years because she couldn't afford the plane ticket. Lived in a shared apartment with 3 other Filipino women to save money. James, his driver, working 3 jobs to pay off student loans from his daughter's college education. She'd graduated 2 years ago with a teaching degree, but the loans totaled $80,000. He was paying $1,200 a month and barely making a dent in the principal. Robert, security, his wife had multiple sclerosis. The disease was progressing, and she needed expensive medications and home modifications. They'd refinanced their house twice to cover medical costs. He took every overtime shift available, worked 70 to 80 hours a week, and still they were drowning in debt. Every single person was struggling. Every single person had kept it hidden, maintained professional competence while carrying crushing burdens. They'd worked in his home, maintained his luxury, and never once asked for help because they knew the rules: don't show weakness. Don't ask for special treatment. Be grateful you have a job at all. The efficiency Damien had prized was actually silent suffering. His perfect household was built on people sacrificing themselves so he could live in oblivious comfort. I'm changing everything, Damien said, his voice carrying across the now silent room. Starting with your salaries. Everyone in this room is receiving an immediate 40% raise, effective today. Stunned silence. Comprehensive health insurance for you and your families. No deductibles, no co-pays, no coverage limits. Real insurance that actually covers what you need. Maya's hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Annual bonuses tied to tenure and loyalty, not just performance metrics. Paid family leave: if someone is sick, you take care of them without fear of losing your paycheck. Sick days without penalty. Mental health resources. And an education assistance fund for your children. James was shaking his head, disbelief written across his face. Sir, is this are you serious? Completely serious. And there's more. He walked to the kitchen, gestured for them to follow. The staff moved hesitantly, still processing, still not quite believing. This changes today, Damien said, indicating the industrial refrigerators. No more wasting food. Leftovers go to staff first. Take them home. Feed your families. I'm arranging partnerships with local shelters for anything that isn't used. But more importantly, if any of you, or your families, ever need food, you take it. You don't ask permission. You don't feel shame. You take it. This is your home too. You shouldn't have to watch food get thrown away while you're hungry. André was crying now, this sophisticated French chef who'd maintained perfect composure for years, tears streaming down his face. The staff areas, Damien continued. The break room, the locker rooms, all of it, we're renovating. Comfortable furniture, proper amenities, the same quality as the rest of the house. You shouldn't have to work in luxury you can't enjoy. He turned to face them all. I'm committing to knowing each of you. Monthly one-on-one meetings about your lives, not your work. An open-door policy for personal issues. I've been a terrible employer. I'm going to do better. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Maya broke the silence with a sob, and suddenly everyone was talking at once, crying, thanking him, not quite believing but desperately wanting to. The formal living room door opened. Elena stood there, still in the same blue dress from this morning, her eyes red from crying. She'd returned from the hospital, uncertain whether she was still welcome after all the drama. When she saw the gathered staff, she hesitated. But Damien waved her in. Everyone, he said, and the room fell silent. I want you all to know that Marcus, Elena's son, is starting experimental treatment in 2 days. The treatment that gives him the best chance of beating his cancer. And it's fully covered. The staff erupted. Not in polite applause, but in genuine, emotional celebration. They rushed to Elena, hugging her, crying with her. And as Damien watched, he realized something that should have been obvious but somehow wasn't. They'd known. They'd all known about Marcus, about Elena's struggles. They'd been quietly helping her, sharing their lunches, covering her shifts when she was too exhausted to stand, slipping her cash with invented excuses. They'd been a family, supporting each other in the ways they could. He'd been the only one isolated. The only one who didn't know. Not because the information was hidden, but because he'd never bothered to look. There's one more thing, Damien said, and the room quieted again. This isn't just about this household. I'm restructuring my entire company. Hale Tech will implement these same policies across all our holdings, better pay, better benefits, better treatment. And I'm starting an employee welfare foundation. Anyone in our company facing hardship will have resources available. But sir, Robert spoke up, his voice gruff with emotion. The board will never approve. I own 51% of Hale Tech. The board can approve or resign. Damien's voice carried steel. I built an empire on the backs of people I never saw. That ends now. His phone buzzed. Then again. And again. He pulled it out to see messages flooding in. From his CFO, urgent. Hearing concerning rumors about restructuring. Call me immediately. From board member Richard Harwood, what's this about salary increases and welfare programs? We need to talk about fiscal responsibility. From his COO, media inquiring about changes. Need message alignment. This could affect stock price. Damien read the messages and felt nothing but contempt for the concerns they represented. Stock price. Fiscal responsibility. Message alignment. All the language of people who saw humans as resources to be optimized rather than people to be valued. Let them question, he said, pocketing his phone. I know what matters now. That evening, Damien sat in his study. The space felt different now, less like a sanctuary and more like what it actually was, an expensive room where he'd hidden from the world. On his desk, beside his laptop and the stack of contracts David Chen had couriered over, sat something that hadn't been there this morning. A crayon drawing. Marcus had given it to him as they were leaving the hospital, pulled it from under his pillow where he'd been working on it. Stick figures holding hands, a tall one labeled Mr. Hale, a woman labeled Mama, a girl labeled Zoe, and a small figure with a bandana labeled Marcus. Above them, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, Mr. Hale is part of our family now. Damien stared at that drawing for a long time. Part of our family now. When had anyone last considered him family? Catherine had left 2 years ago. His father had died at his desk, and Damien had felt more relief than grief. His mother had passed shortly after, lonely and sad. He had colleagues, employees, business associates. But family? A 7-year-old boy fighting cancer had decided Damien was family. Had drawn him into their circle with crayons and hope and the absolute faith of a child who didn't yet understand that billionaires and maids' families weren't supposed to mix. Damien picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He found Catherine's name, stared at it for a moment, then opened a text message. He typed slowly, carefully, knowing that some words mattered more than others. You were right. I became a machine. I forgot how to be human, forgot what matters, forgot everything except profit and growth and success that meant nothing. But I'm remembering now. I'm trying to do better. I wanted you to know that. You tried to save me, and I was too blind to see it. Thank you for trying. D. He hit send before he could overthink it. The response came faster than he expected. I'm glad, Damien. Truly. It's never too late to remember who you are. Then, a moment later. What changed? Damien looked at Marcus's drawing. At the stick figures holding hands. At the careful letters spelling out family. I met a 7-year-old boy wearing a Captain America bandana, he typed. He reminded me what bravery actually looks like. And what it means to have something worth fighting for. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally. I'd like to hear about him sometime. If you want to tell me. I'd like that, Damien responded. He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was alive with lights. Millions of people living their lives, fighting their battles, carrying their burdens. How many were like Elena? Like Andre? Like all the people he'd never bothered to see? His phone buzzed again. Another message from the board, another concerned investor, another person worried about quarterly earnings and market perception. He ignored them all. Tomorrow, he'd deal with the board. He'd face the skeptical investors and the business press who would call him soft, naive, foolish. He'd weather the accusations of fiscal irresponsibility and misguided charity. But tonight, he sat in his study with a crayon drawing on his desk, and for the first time in years, Damien Hale knew exactly what he was fighting for. Not market share. Not profit margins. Not his net worth or his company's valuation. He was fighting for Marcus. For Elena and Zoe. For Andre and Maya and Sophia and James and Robert and every other person trying to survive in a system that valued profit over people. He was fighting to remember what it meant to be human. And unlike the battles he'd fought in boardrooms, this one actually mattered. 2 weeks had passed since that night in the kitchen. Marcus had started the experimental treatment 3 days ago. The drug was working, Dr. Kim was cautiously optimistic, using words like promising and encouraging response, but it was making him violently ill. Elena sent Damien daily updates, Marcus throwing up 6 times in one night. Marcus too weak to lift his head. Marcus crying from the pain but still trying to smile when the nurses came in. The treatment was saving his life, but it was also destroying him, piece by piece, before it could rebuild him stronger. Elena and Zoe had moved to a new apartment, a real two-bedroom in a safe neighborhood with working windows and no rats. Damien had arranged it through the company housing assistance program he'd created. Elena had resisted at first, pride warring with practicality, until Damien had pointed out that she'd need a proper place to bring Marcus home when he was discharged. Zoe was back in school full-time. No more falling asleep at her desk from hunger-induced exhaustion. No more hoarding food in her backpack. She'd gained 4 pounds, and her teachers had noticed the difference, sent Elena a note saying Zoe seemed lighter, more engaged, able to focus. All of this should have felt like victory. Instead, Damien was sitting in a conference room on the 30th floor of Hale Tech headquarters, facing 5 board members who looked at him like he'd lost his mind. The conference room was all glass and steel, designed to impress and intimidate. Massive windows overlooked Manhattan, the city spread out below like a game board. The table was imported marble, the chairs Italian leather. Everything about the space screamed power and money. Richard Harwood sat at the head of the table, not Damien's seat, but Richard had claimed it anyway, a subtle power play. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He'd been Hale Tech's lead investor since the Series B funding round, had made billions off Damien's success, and clearly believed that gave him the right to dictate company direction. The other 4 board members flanked him, Jennifer Chen from Apex Ventures, Michael Torres representing the pension fund, David Park from the investment consortium, and Margaret Winters, who'd been on the board since the IPO. They all looked concerned. Worried. Like they were staging an intervention for someone with a substance abuse problem. Damien, Richard began, his voice carrying the patronizing tone of someone speaking to a child. We need to discuss your recent, charitable impulses. Damien leaned back in his chair, his expression neutral. My business decisions, you mean? Charity, Richard corrected. Raising salaries by 40% across the board. Implementing gold-plated insurance that covers everything up to and including experimental treatments. Setting up college funds. A welfare foundation. He ticked off each item like an accusation. These aren't business decisions. They're emotional reactions. Emotional reactions to what? Damien asked calmly. To one employee's personal tragedy, Jennifer said, her voice gentler but no less critical. We understand you feel sympathetic about the situation with your housekeeper's son. Elena, Damien interrupted. Her name is Elena Santos. Right. Elena. And we're glad you could help her family. But Damien, you can't restructure an entire company based on one anecdotal situation. It's not sustainable. The employee welfare program alone will cost $15 million in the first year, Michael added, pulling out a folder thick with financial projections. The salary increases will add $8 million annually to operating costs. The insurance expansion, another $12 million. We're looking at $35 million in new expenses. And what are we getting for it? Richard's voice hardened. Competitors are laughing at us. Calling you soft. The tech press is having a field day with think pieces about billionaire savior complexes and performative kindness. The stock price has dropped 3% in 2 weeks on concerns about leadership. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Damien. You're jeopardizing everything we built. Everything you built. For what? A feel-good publicity stunt? The silence in the room was heavy. The other board members watched Damien, waiting for his response. Waiting to see if he'd back down. Damien thought about Marcus, so sick from the treatment he could barely open his eyes. Thought about Zoe eating from the garbage. Thought about Elena selling her wedding ring for $850 while he'd been wearing a watch worth $40,000. It's not a stunt, he said quietly. It's the right thing to do. The right thing to do, Richard repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. Damien, we run a business, not a charity. Our responsibility is to shareholders, to profit, to growth. To people, Damien interrupted. Our responsibility is to people. The ones who actually do the work that makes those profits possible. He pulled out his own folder, placed it on the table. Let's talk numbers, since that's what you understand. Employee turnover in tech averages 13% annually. Each departure costs us roughly 150% of that employee's salary when you factor in recruitment, onboarding, lost productivity. Last year, that cost HaleTech $47 million. He opened the folder, slid documents across the table. Companies with comprehensive benefits packages have 40% lower turnover. That alone would save us nearly $20 million annually. Happy employees are 12% more productive. For HaleTech, that translates to roughly $60 million in additional value creation per year. You're cherry-picking studies, Jennifer started. I'm citing peer-reviewed research, Damien said. Google implemented better benefits in 2007. Their turnover dropped by half. Costco pays 40% above industry average and has the lowest turnover in retail. Salesforce built their success on employee-first policies. This isn't radical. It's smart business. Then why aren't more companies doing it? Margaret asked. Because it requires seeing employees as people instead of resources, Damien said. Because it means accepting slightly lower profit margins in exchange for sustainability and humanity. Because it's easier to squeeze every penny out of workers and replace them when they break than to actually invest in their well-being. Richard's face had gone red. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You've lost perspective. You've let one bleeding heart story cloud your judgment. One story. Damien's voice rose for the first time. I talked to my household staff 2 weeks ago. 8 people. Every single one was struggling. Crushing medical debt. Student loans. Elderly parents. Sick children. They were working for me, maintaining my luxury, and they were drowning. And I didn't know. Didn't care. Didn't ask. He stood, his hands flat on the marble table. That's not one story. That's systematic failure. And it's not just my household. It's this company. It's the entire industry. We've built a system where people can work full-time and still not afford rent, food, healthcare. Where a 7-year-old can't get life-saving treatment because his mother's insurance won't cover it. And we call that efficient. Damien, David started. No, Damien cut him off. I'm not done. This board has spent the last 2 weeks worried about stock prices and competitor opinions. Not one of you has asked about Marcus. About whether he's responding to treatment. About whether Elena can sleep at night now that she's not choosing between feeding her children and paying medical bills. Because that's not our concern, Richard said coldly. Our concern is the company. The shareholders. The bottom line. Then you've forgotten what this company was supposed to be, Damien said. When I started HaleTech, the mission was, technology should serve humanity. Not, technology should maximize shareholder value. Humanity. And somewhere along the way, we forgot that humanity includes the people who work here. This is getting us nowhere, Richard stood, his chair scraping back. Damien, the board has discussed this. We're prepared to vote you out if you continue down this path. The words landed like a bomb in the quiet room. You're the founder, yes, Richard continued. But you're not irreplaceable. You've shown erratic judgment, made emotional decisions, prioritized personal feelings over fiscal responsibility. We need leadership that understands business realities. Choose, he said, his voice hard. Your company or your crusade. Damien looked around the table. Jennifer wouldn't meet his eyes. Michael was studying the financial documents. David and Margaret looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The silence stretched. Outside the windows, the city continued its endless motion, millions of people living lives these board members would never see or understand. Damien thought of Marcus in his hospital bed, weak from treatment but still smiling. Thought of Zoe's eyes when she'd eaten that first real meal. Thought of Elena's broken pride reforming into hope. Then vote, he said. Richard's eyes widened slightly. He'd expected capitulation, compromise. Not this. But before you do, Damien continued, his voice steel, know this, I own 51% of this company. You can't vote me out without my shares. And I'm not selling. I'm not backing down. He let that sink in, watched the realization dawn. So you have two choices, support these changes, or resign and find another company to run into the ground while its workers suffer. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Richard grabbed his briefcase. This is insane, he said. You're destroying everything we built. No, Damien said. I'm remembering why we built it. Richard stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Jennifer and Michael exchanged glances, then followed, their expressions conflicted. David and Margaret remained, uncertain. Well, Margaret said finally. This should be interesting. The story leaked within hours. Billionaire CEO defies board, prioritizes workers over profits, ran in the Wall Street Journal. Hailtech founder chooses humanity over market cap, declared Bloomberg. Damien Hale's $35 million bet on employee welfare, analyzed Forbes. The business media split. Some praised him as visionary, revolutionary, the future of ethical capitalism. Others condemned him as naive, irresponsible, a billionaire playing at philanthropy while risking shareholder value. Social media exploded. #HailHumanity trended alongside #HailHypocrisy. Former Hailtech employees came forward with stories, some supporting him, praising the changes, others condemning him for not implementing them sooner, calling him a hypocrite who'd built his fortune on their exploitation. The publicity was intense, uncomfortable, inescapable. 3 days into the media storm, Elena appeared at the penthouse. She looked terrified. Mr. Hale, she said, her voice shaking. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. They're attacking you because you helped us. Elena. Maybe I should resign. Maybe if I left, if we just disappeared, they'd stop and you could. Stop, Damien said firmly. This has nothing to do with you and everything to do with a broken system I helped create. You're not resigning. You're not disappearing. We're not backing down. But Elena's fear wasn't unfounded. The pressure was intense. His phone rang constantly with investors demanding explanations, partners questioning his judgment, analysts predicting Hailtech's collapse. In the midst of it all, Damien visited Marcus. The boy was in bad shape. The experimental treatment was working, Dr. Kim confirmed the cancer markers were dropping, but the side effects were brutal. Marcus could barely keep his eyes open, his small body ravaged by the drugs fighting to save it. But the nurses had been talking, and Marcus had heard fragments. Enough to piece together that Mr. Hale was in trouble. Are you okay? Marcus asked weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you in trouble because of me? Damien's heart broke. This child, fighting for his life, worried about him. No, Marcus, he said, sitting carefully on the edge of the hospital bed. I'm finally doing something right. But the news said people are mad at you. Some people are. But that's okay. Why? Damien thought about how to explain corporate politics to a 7-year-old. Then realized he didn't need to explain the politics. Just the principle. Your dad, he said. What was he like? Marcus's face lit up despite his exhaustion. He was the best. He used to say, do what's right, even when it's hard. That's good advice, Damien said. That's what I'm trying to do. Do what's right, even though it's hard. Marcus studied him with those two wise eyes. Then you're a superhero. Just like in my drawings. The simple faith of a child cut through all the noise, all the complexity, all the second-guessing. Marcus wasn't worried about stock prices or board politics or media narratives. He just wanted to know if Damien was doing the right thing. And Damien was. 2 days later, Catherine called. "I've been watching the news," she said without preamble. "Damien, I just wanted to say. I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than he'd expected. "You finally remembered who you were supposed to be," she continued. "It took a 7-year-old in a Captain America bandana, but you got there." "I'm taking a lot of heat," Damien admitted. "Of course you are. You're threatening the entire system. But Damien, you're on the right side of this. Don't forget that when it gets hard." Her words gave him strength he didn't know he needed. Then, late one night, everything changed. A video surfaced on social media. Security footage from his penthouse kitchen, time-stamped at 2:47 a.m. 2 weeks earlier. Someone on his staff, someone sympathetic, had leaked it. The video showed Damien in his bathrobe, standing at the kitchen counter. A small girl sat on a stool, thin and terrified. The footage was silent, but the body language was clear. This was the moment. The clip showed Damien making a sandwich. Not ordering someone to make it. Making it himself, carefully layering ingredients, cutting it precisely. Then setting it in front of the girl. Her hesitation. His gentle insistence. Her first bite. Her tears. The caption read, "This is the moment that changed everything." When a billionaire saw a hungry child and remembered what it means to be human. It went viral. 10 million views in 24 hours. 20 million by the end of the second day. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. The narrative shifted from eccentric billionaire to man who remembered his humanity. #Hail Humanity exploded. Not as a defensive hashtag, but as a movement. Hail Tech employees started speaking out, not just household staff, but office workers, factory workers, tech developers, everyone. They shared stories of the changes, the salary increases, the better insurance, the feeling of being valued for the first time in their careers. "For the first time, I feel like a person, not a resource," wrote a software engineer from the Seattle office. "My daughter can finally get the surgery she needs," posted a warehouse worker from New Jersey. "I told my wife we don't have to choose between fixing the car and buying groceries anymore," shared a customer service rep. The testimonials flooded social media. The narrative wasn't crazy billionaire anymore. It was revolutionary leader. It was, this is what ethical capitalism looks like. It was, why aren't more companies doing this? The stock price, which had dipped 3%, surged 7%. Late that night, Damien sat in his study, exhausted but unable to sleep. His phone rang. Richard Harwood's name appeared on the screen. He considered not answering. Then, curious, he picked up. "The board has reconsidered," Richard said without preamble. No apology. No acknowledgement of the confrontation. Just cold pragmatism. "We're willing to support your initiatives." "Why the change of heart?" Damien asked, though he already knew. "The publicity has been better than anticipated. Employee satisfaction surveys are at record highs. Recruitment applications have tripled. And the stock is up 7%. Apparently, the market likes companies that don't treat their workers like disposable resources." There it was. They still didn't understand. They thought this was about PR, about market perception, about finding a new angle to maximize profit. "So you'll support the changes," Damien said carefully. "Yes. The full program. The board will vote in favor at the next meeting." "Good." "Damien," Richard's voice carried something that might have been grudging respect. "I still think you're being reckless. But I was wrong about the market response. Investors are calling this the Hail Tech model. Other companies are watching. You might have started something bigger than you realize." After he hung up, Damien sat in the quiet study, processing. They'd support him now. Not because it was right, but because it was profitable. Not because they understood about Marcus or Elena or the system that had failed them, but because the stock price justified it. Part of him wanted to reject their support, to tell them to resign anyway if they couldn't understand the real reasons. But the practical part of him, the part that had built a company from nothing, knew better. The why didn't matter if the result helped people. If Richard's support meant better pay and benefits for thousands of employees, did it matter that his motivation was profit rather than compassion? Damien looked at Marcus's drawing, still taped to his desk. The stick figures holding hands. Mr. Hale is part of our family now. Some battles you fight for profit, he said to the empty room. Some you fight for people. This battle had started for people. If profit followed, if the market rewarded humanity, if other companies copied the model for all the wrong reasons but got the right results, well, that was still better than the alternative. The phone buzzed. A text from Elena. Marcus's latest scan came back. Cancer markers down 40%. Dr. Kim says we're winning. Damien stared at those words. We're winning. Outside, the city glittered. Inside, a crayon drawing reminded him what mattered. He'd fought the board and won. The media storm had passed. The stock price had recovered. But more importantly, Marcus was winning his fight. And that, Damien realized, was the only victory that had ever really mattered. 3 months had changed everything. Marcus Santos had completed 8 rounds of experimental treatment. The cancer, that aggressive, terrifying invader that had nearly stolen a 7-year-old's life, was in remission. Dr. Kim used words like, cautiously optimistic, and excellent response, and every reason to hope. But what mattered most was visible in the boy himself. He'd gained 15 pounds. His cheeks had filled out, no longer hollow and sharp. His eyes, which had been bright but tired, now sparkled with the energy of a child who'd been given his life back. And his hair, his beautiful, curly hair, was growing back in soft patches across his head. But he still wore the Captain America bandana. Not to hide baldness anymore, but as a badge of honor. A reminder of the battle he'd fought and won. On a warm spring morning, Marcus walked out of St. Catherine's Hospital for the last time as a patient. The hospital staff had lined the hallway, nurses, doctors, orderlies, even the cafeteria workers who'd saved him extra jello. They applauded as he walked past, this small warrior who'd become their inspiration, the boy who'd fought with a smile and never lost hope. Marcus waved like a celebrity, his Captain America bandana bright against the institutional beige walls. Elena walked beside him, tears of joy streaming down her face, one hand holding his discharge papers, the other clutching Zoe's hand. We're going home, Mama, Marcus said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. I'm really going home. Yes, baby, Elena whispered. You're really going home. But they weren't going back to the studio apartment with rats and broken windows. That chapter of their lives was over. Damien's car, driven by James, who'd learned Marcus loved hearing stories about different neighborhoods, pulled up to a modest house in Queens. 3 bedrooms, a small yard with grass that needed mowing, a porch with steps that creaked slightly. The kind of house that didn't appear in architecture magazines but held more warmth than 1,000 penthouses. Not charity, Damien had insisted when Elena had protested 3 weeks earlier. Company housing assistance. All senior staff are eligible. It's in your new contract. Elena had cried then too. Happy tears were becoming her new normal. As the car pulled up to the curb, Marcus pressed his face to the window. Is that ours? Really ours? Really yours, Damien confirmed from the front seat. Then Marcus saw the yard. It was full of people. The entire household staff from the penthouse, Andre, Maya, Sophia, James, Robert, everyone. But also dozens of others, Hale Tech employees from various departments, neighbors from the building, even some of the nurses from St. Catherine's who'd taken their break to come. Banners stretched across the porch, "Welcome home, Marcus," and "Our Hero." Balloons in red, white, and blue, Captain America colors, bobbed in the spring breeze. Is this all for me? Marcus breathed, his eyes huge. All for you, buddy, Damien said. Marcus burst from the car before it had fully stopped, Elena calling after him to be careful, but he was already running, something he hadn't been able to do in months, toward the crowd. People cheered, and Marcus beamed, soaking up the love like sunshine after a long winter. Damien stood on the edge of the celebration, watching. He held a wrapped box, blue paper with silver stars. Mr. Hale. Marcus called, spotting him. Did you see all these people? I see them, Damien said, kneeling down as Marcus ran over. And I have something for you. Marcus took the box with careful hands, his eyes wide. He tore the paper with the enthusiasm of a child who'd been denied too many gifts in his short life. Inside was a laptop, not too expensive, but quality, perfect for learning. For when you start learning to make those computers that help sick kids, Damien said, his throat tight. Marcus stared at the laptop, then at Damien, then back at the laptop. Then he did something that shattered every remaining wall around Damien's heart. He threw his arms around Damien's neck and hugged him with the fierce, unrestrained love of a child who didn't know that billionaires and Maid sons weren't supposed to hug like family. Thank you, Marcus whispered into Damien's shoulder. Thank you for everything. For the medicine and the new house and for saving me. Damien had to close his eyes against the tears. You saved me first, Marcus. You just didn't know it. The backyard barbecue was everything Damien's formal dinner parties had never been, loud, chaotic, full of life. Andre manned the grill, but not as an employee. As a friend, laughing with Robert about proper grilling technique, both men wearing ridiculous aprons that Maya had brought as gifts. The food was simple, burgers, hot dogs, corn on the cob, but it tasted better than any Michelin-starred meal Damien had ever eaten. Children ran through the yard, staff members had brought their kids, and they played with Marcus and Zoe like they'd known each other forever. Marcus was the center of it all, his energy seemingly boundless, making up for all the months he'd spent too sick to play. Elena sat on the porch steps, watching her children run and laugh. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling, that kind of smile that comes from surviving something you weren't sure you'd survive. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Damien sat down beside her. I still don't understand why, Elena said quietly, her eyes never leaving Marcus. Why you did all this? You didn't have to. You could have just ignored it. Fired me. Moved on with your life. Damien watched Marcus show a younger child how to throw a baseball, patient and encouraging despite being only 7 himself. I was dying too, Elena, he said. Not like Marcus. But I was dying inside. I'd built this empire and lost myself in it. Became exactly what I swore I'd never be, my father, rich and isolated and alone. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Your family reminded me what matters. You saved my life as much as I saved Marcus's. I find that hard to believe, Elena said softly. It's true. That night, finding Zoe in my kitchen, it broke something open. Or maybe it fixed something that had been broken for a long time. I'd forgotten what it meant to be human. To connect. To care about something beyond quarterly earnings and market share. Elena reached over and squeezed his hand. You started something, you know. The changes at Hale Tech. Other companies are watching. Tech blogs are calling it the Hale Tech model. Our competitors mocked you at first, but now their employees are demanding the same treatment. Good, Damien said. You changed the game, Mr. Hale. Damien, he corrected gently. Please. Just Damien. A commotion on the porch drew their attention. Marcus had climbed onto a chair and was calling for everyone's attention, his small voice ringing out across the yard. I want to say something. The crowd quieted, All eyes on the small boy in the Captain America bandana. "I learned something while I was sick," Marcus began, his voice clear and strong. "Being brave isn't not being scared. Being brave is being scared but doing good things anyway." He looked at Damien. Mr. Hale was brave. He changed his whole life to help us when he didn't have to. Then at his mother, and Mama was brave. She never gave up even when everything was hard. She fought for me every single day. He touched his bandana. And I was brave too. I fought the cancer, and I won. He spread his arms wide. So I think we're all superheroes here. All of us. There wasn't a dry eye in the yard. Adults who'd faced boardrooms and deadlines and life's hardships openly wept at the wisdom of a 7-year-old who'd stared down death and come out smiling. Zoe rushed to hug her brother. Elena pulled both children close, all three of them crying and laughing. Damien turned away, overwhelmed, his own tears falling freely for the first time in years that he could remember. 1 week later, Damien stood in his kitchen at 7 a.m., making coffee. The penthouse was different now. Photos lined the walls, not expensive art, but real photographs. Him with Marcus at the hospital. The whole household staff at Marcus's homecoming. Elena and her children laughing in their new kitchen. The Hale Tech Employee Appreciation Day where 200 workers had shown up to thank him personally. The formal dining room hosted weekly dinners now, loud, messy gatherings where his staff and their families ate together at that table for 12 that had sat empty for so long. His office walls were covered in Marcus's drawings. Crayon superheroes and stick figure families had replaced graphs and market analyses. Elena came in through the service entrance, old habits died hard, but now she walked straight to the main kitchen like she belonged there. Because she did. "Good morning, Elena," Damien said, handing her a cup of coffee exactly as she liked it. "How's Marcus?" "Excited," Elena said, her face glowing. His 3-month scan yesterday showed no sign of cancer. Dr. Kim used the word cured for the first time. She's still cautious, but Damien, she said cured. They stood in comfortable silence, sipping coffee like old friends. Like family. At Hale Tech, the transformation was complete. The new Employee Wellness Center opened last month, full gym, meditation rooms, mental health counselors on staff. The on-site childcare facility had a waiting list. The profit-sharing program had distributed $4 million to employees last quarter. Employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. Turnover had dropped 55%. Productivity was up 18%. And the stock price? Higher than it had ever been. Damien had been right, investing in people paid off. In every way that mattered. His personal life had changed too. He'd reconnected with Catherine, not romantically, but as friends who'd once loved each other and could respect what they'd both become. He was dating someone new, Dr. Sarah Kim, Marcus's oncologist, who understood about second chances and the importance of actually living. He slept better. Exercised regularly. Actually enjoyed his wealth instead of just accumulating it. But most importantly, he knew his people. All 847 Hale Tech employees. He'd made it his mission to learn their names, their stories, their dreams. Monthly one-on-ones weren't about performance metrics anymore. They were about life. Last month, Damien had announced the Marcus Santos Foundation, dedicated to helping families afford childhood cancer treatment. Marcus had been there, standing at the podium beside him, no longer the sick child in a hospital bed but a healthy boy with curly hair and dreams of helping others. "I'm going to help run it when I'm older," Marcus had declared to the assembled press. "I know you will," Damien had said, and meant it. Late that night, Damien couldn't sleep. But this time, it wasn't from the suffocating emptiness that had plagued him for years. It was excitement. Anticipation. The pleasant buzz of a life fully lived. He went down to the kitchen, drawn by old habit but finding something entirely new. Zoe was there, standing in front of the open refrigerator, the light spilling out across the floor. She froze when she saw him, then grinned, no fear, no shame, just the easy comfort of someone who knew they belonged. "Sorry, Damien," she said, using his first name like he'd asked her 2 months ago. "I got hungry studying. Is it okay if I—" "Of course," he interrupted, pulling out the stool at the island. "Help yourself. That's what it's there for." Zoe made herself a sandwich, real bread, fresh turkey, cheese, vegetables, with the casual confidence of a child who'd never again have to wonder where her next meal would come from. She sat beside him, and they talked about school, about her straight-A report card, about her dreams of becoming a doctor. "I want to help kids like Marcus," she said. "Kids who are sick and scared. I want to make them feel better." "You will," Damien assured her. "And I'll make sure you have every opportunity to do it. College, medical school, whatever you need." "Really?" Her eyes shone. "Really? That's what the education fund is for. You and Marcus both. Your mother never has to worry about paying for your futures. You just have to worry about dreaming big enough." After Zoe went back to her studies, Damien sat alone in the quiet kitchen. He thought back to that night 3 months ago. Finding a desperate child eating from his trash. How horrified he'd been. How it had felt like discovering a terrible secret about himself. But really, it had been a gift. He'd thought he was rescuing them, Elena and her children, his staff, his employees. He'd framed it as charity, as giving back, as using his wealth for good. But the truth was simpler and more profound: they'd rescued him. From a life of empty luxury that meant nothing. From becoming the machine Catherine had accused him of being. From dying alone and unmourned like his father, rich in everything except what mattered. All the money in the world means nothing if you've lost your humanity. He'd almost lost it. Had been well on his way to losing it completely. But a 10-year-old girl eating from the garbage had given it back to him. Saturday morning light streamed through the kitchen windows. The house woke gradually, staff arriving for the weekly breakfast that had become tradition, Elena humming as she prepped food, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, the sounds of life filling spaces that had known only silence. Then the front door burst open. "Damien." Marcus's voice rang through the penthouse. "Look. Look." My hair grew back curly. Marcus ran into the kitchen, his head covered in soft brown curls, no bandana for the first time in months. He looked like any other healthy 7-year-old, which, miraculously, was exactly what he was. He threw himself at Damien, who caught him in a hug that felt like coming home. Elena followed, carrying groceries for the breakfast feast. Zoe came behind her, holding Marcus's latest drawing, the whole group, stick figures holding hands, Damien, Elena, Zoe, Marcus, the household staff, everyone who'd become family. At the bottom, in careful letters, "We're all superheroes." Damien looked at the 3 of them, the woman who'd sacrificed everything, the girl who'd eaten from trash to save her mother a meal, the boy who'd fought cancer with a smile, and felt something settle in his chest. This was what wealth was really for. Not isolation. Not excess. Not empty rooms and expensive art no one looked at. But this, connection, community, making a real difference in real lives. Being human. And that's where we'll end the story. Sometimes the smallest acts of desperation lead to the greatest transformations. Damien Hale found a child eating from his trash and discovered he'd been starving too, just not for food. He'd been starving for purpose, for connection, for humanity. For something that mattered beyond profit margins and market share and the endless accumulation of wealth that meant nothing. And in saving one family, he saved himself. Because that's the thing about humanity, you can't give it away without getting it back multiplied. You can't see people, truly see them, without being seen yourself. You can't open your heart to someone else's pain without opening it to your own capacity for joy. I hope this story reminded you that kindness costs nothing but means everything. That seeing people, truly seeing them, can change lives. That we're all just one moment of awareness away from remembering what matters. In the kitchen of a billionaire's penthouse, Damien Hale stood surrounded by his found family, a maid who'd become his friend, her children who'd become his purpose, a household staff who'd become his community. The same kitchen where it all began. But everything was different now. Not just the room, filled with laughter and life instead of silence and waste. But the man. He was smiling, genuinely, deeply, completely smiling. For the first time in years, he was truly alive. And it all started with one hungry child and one moment of choosing humanity over indifference. Sometimes that's all it takes to save a life. Sometimes it's all it takes to save yourself.
Drop a comment below about what this story meant to you. Where were you listening from? What moment resonated most? Did it remind you of someone in your own life who needed to be seen? And if you want more stories about everyday heroes and unexpected transformations, hit that subscribe button. Because these stories matter. They remind us that underneath all our differences, wealth and poverty, power and vulnerability, success and struggle, we're all just human. We're all just trying to find our way home. Thanks for spending this time with us. Until next time, remember, the most powerful thing you can do is see someone. Really see them. You never know whose life you might save, or who might save yours.